When rancher Jonas Hale finds a wounded Apache woman bleeding in his canyon with an arrow aimed at his heart, he breaks the one vow he swore on his wife's grave never to let anyone close again. But Naya Rivers isn't asking for mercy. She's a survivor with secrets that could destroy them both, and the outlaws hunting her won't stop until they find what she's hiding. Stay with me until the end of this 2-hour journey and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The desert didn't forgive, and Jonas Hale had stopped asking it to. He sat on the splintered porch of his ranch house as the Arizona sun bled across the western sky, painting the mesas in shades of copper and crimson that reminded him too much of blood. 3 years since Margaret died. 3 years since he'd buried her beneath the cottonwood tree on the eastern ridge, and 3 years since he'd last felt anything resembling hope. The ranch still stood barely a testament to stubbornness more than skill. 40 head of cattle, a barn that leaked when it rained, and a heart that had forgotten how to beat for anything but survival. Jonas took a long pull from his whiskey bottle, letting the burn trace down his throat like penance. The amber liquid had become his most faithful companion, more reliable than the hired hands who drifted through like tumbleweeds, more honest than the merchants in town who smiled while they cheated him. At 42, he felt ancient, weathered by loss and loneliness, into something harder than the sun-baked earth beneath his boots. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and something else. Something wrong. Jonas's hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped against the porch rail, a motion so practiced it happened without thought. Living on the edge of Apache territory taught a man to trust his instincts, and right now every nerve in his body screamed danger. Then he heard it, a cry sharp and desperate echoing through the canyon ridges like a wounded animal. But this was no animal. This was human, and it was close. Jonas was on his feet before he'd made the conscious decision to move rifle in hand, his weathered boots kicking up dust as he strode toward the sound. The cry came again, weaker this time, from the direction of Copper Canyon, about a quarter-mile north. His cattle sometimes wandered that way, drawn by a seasonal creek that ran through the rocks. But he'd warned every hand who worked for him to stay clear after dark. Apache hunting parties used those canyons, and a white man caught alone was as good as dead. But something pulled him forward, curiosity, or maybe just the bitter recognition that he had nothing left to lose. The canyon walls rose around him like ancient sentinels, their red stone faces carved by millennia of wind and rain into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. Shadows pooled in the crevices, growing longer as the sun sank lower. Jonas moved carefully, his rifle ready, his breath steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He'd been a soldier once before Margaret, before the ranch, before everything that mattered had turned to ash. The training never left buried deep in his bones like bedrock. He found her in a hollow between two massive boulders, partially hidden by a scrub oak that had somehow found purchase in the unforgiving stone. At first he saw only the blood dark against the pale sand pooling beneath her left side in a spreading stain that made his stomach clench. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw her clearly. She was Apache, no question. Her buckskin dress, though torn and bloodied, was unmistakable, decorated with the intricate beadwork that marked her tribe. Her black hair, long and unbound, spilled across the ground like spilled ink. But it was her face that stopped him cold. High cheekbones sharp enough to cut full lips, pressed into a thin line of pain, and eyes like black fire that locked onto his with such intensity he actually took a step back. She had an arrow nocked in her bow drawn, and aimed directly at his chest, despite the obvious agony it caused her to hold the weapon steady. Her arms trembled with the effort, fresh blood seeping from the wound in her side, but her gaze never wavered. "Come closer, and I'll put this through your heart, white man," she said in perfect English, her voice hoarse but defiant. "I may be dying, but I'll take you with me." Jonas slowly lowered his rifle, his hands spread wide in a gesture of peace. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." "Lies." She spat the word like poison. "That's all your kind knows. Lies and death." He couldn't argue with that. He'd seen enough in his 42 years to know that her hatred was earned, built on a foundation of broken treaties and broken bodies. The army had done things in the name of civilization that still haunted his dreams, things he'd been too young and too eager to question when he'd worn the uniform. "Maybe so," Jonas said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "But right now you're bleeding out in my canyon, and I'm the only help you're likely to find for 50 miles. So you've got a choice to make. You can put that arrow through me, die here alone, and let the coyotes pick your bones clean, or you can lower that bow and let me help you." For a long moment, they stared at each other, a standoff as old as the canyon walls themselves. White man and Apache conquer and conquered. Though Jonas had never felt much like a conqueror, he'd just been trying to survive, same as everyone else in this godforsaken territory. Her arms began to shake harder, the bow wavering. Blood had soaked through her dress, dripping onto the sand in a steady rhythm that sounded like a clock counting down her final moments. Jonas saw the exact instant when her strength failed. Her eyes widened slightly. The bow drooped and she collapsed forward with a gasp that sounded like surrender and defiance all at once. He moved without thinking, crossing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He caught her before she hit the ground, his rifle clattering to the rocks as he gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body burning with fever despite the cool evening air. Up close he could see the wound clearly, a bullet hole, not a blade. The entry wound in her side was neat, professional, the kind of shot a skilled marksman made. Someone had been trying to kill her and they'd nearly succeeded. "Put me down," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But there was no strength behind the command, and they both knew it. "Not a chance," Jonas replied, adjusting his grip to avoid the wound. "You've got maybe an hour before you bleed out completely. I've got whiskey bandages and enough battlefield medicine to maybe keep you alive. Your choice ends here. I'm taking you to my ranch and you're going to let me patch you up." She tried to fight him, her hand weakly, pushing against his chest, but the effort only made her wound bleed faster. Her eyes, those fierce black eyes, brimmed with something that might have been tears or might have been pure rage. Jonas couldn't tell which. Why? The single word carried the weight of 1,000 questions. Why help her? Why risk it? Why care? Jonas looked down at her. This woman who had been ready to kill him moments ago. This enemy who was now dying in his arms, and for the first time in 3 years he felt something crack in the ice that had encased his heart. "Because leaving you here to die makes me the monster you think I am," he said simply. "And I've got enough ghosts already." He didn't wait for her response. Scooping up his rifle with his free hand, Jonas turned and began the long walk back to his ranch. She went still in his arms, either unconscious or simply too weak to protest. Her blood soaked into his shirt, warm and wet, a physical reminder of the choice he'd just made, a choice that violated every vow he'd sworn when Margaret died, every wall he'd built around his heart, every promise to never let himself care about another living soul. The walk back seemed longer than it should have, each step carrying the weight of consequences he couldn't yet foresee. The sun had fully set by the time his ranch house came into view, a dark silhouette against the star-strewn sky. The barn loomed to the left. His cattle settled for the night in the near pasture, everything exactly as he'd left it. Except nothing would be the same after this. He could feel it in his bones, the way a man feels a storm coming. Jonas kicked open the door to his house and carried her straight to the bedroom, his bedroom the only one with a proper bed and clean sheets. He laid her down carefully, her head settling into the pillow that still sometimes smelled like Margaret's lavender soap, though that was probably just his imagination playing tricks. The woman's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus on his face. "You'll die for this," she whispered. "They're hunting me. They'll kill you. For helping." "Who's hunting you?" Jonas demanded, already moving to light the lamps, gathering supplies from the chest at the foot of the bed. Whiskey, clean cloth needle, and thread. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Muscle memory from too many battlefield surgeries to count. "Doesn't matter." She breathed, her eyes starting to glaze with fever. "They'll come soon. You should leave me. Save yourself." Jonas set the whiskey bottle beside her and began cutting away the blood-soaked dress around her wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good, he wouldn't have to dig it out. But the exit wound was ragged and infection was already setting in around the edges. He'd seen men die from less. "I don't run," he said, pouring whiskey over the wound. She arched off the bed with a scream that probably carried all the way to town, her hands fisting in the sheets. "And I sure as hell don't abandon people I've decided to help, so whoever's coming can come. I'll deal with them when they get here." He worked quickly, cleaning the wound, stitching it closed with steady hands that had done this too many times to tremble. She drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally whimpering in pain, but never begging him to stop. Pride Jonas recognized. She had pride enough to fill the canyon where he'd found her. When he finished, he bandaged her tightly and covered her with a blanket. Her fever was still high, her skin burning to the touch, but the bleeding had stopped. Whether she'd live through the night was in God's hands now, assuming God paid any attention to this corner of the world. Jonas sat back in the chair beside the bed, his shirt stiff with her dried blood, and studied her face in the lamplight. Even unconscious, even pale and drawn with pain, she was striking. Beautiful in a way that seemed almost dangerous, like a knife blade catching the light. He wondered who she was, what had brought her to his canyon, what secrets she carried that were worth killing for. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room, though he wasn't sure if he was asking about saving her or about the feelings already stirring in his chest. Feelings he'd buried with Margaret and sworn never to resurrect. The night deepened around them. Jonas dozed fitfully in the chair, his rifle across his lap, waking at every sound, the creak of the house, settling the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the eaves. Each time he woke, he checked her breathing, laid a hand on her forehead to gauge her fever, adjusted the blanket that she kept kicking off in her delirium. Around midnight, she began to speak in her sleep. Apache words he didn't understand, flowing like water over stones, sometimes soft and sometimes sharp, with what sounded like anger or grief. Then she switched to English fragmented sentences that made no sense but hinted at secrets. "The map! They can't have it! My people! The sacred place!" Her hand clutched at something around her neck, a small leather pouch he hadn't noticed before hidden beneath her dress. "Father, I promised to protect." Jonas leaned forward. His curiosity piqued, but he didn't touch the pouch. Whatever she was protecting, whatever secret she carried, it wasn't his business. His job was simply to keep her alive, nothing more. He'd save her life, she'd recover, and then she'd leave. Simple, clean, no complications. Except nothing about this situation felt simple. Dawn broke slowly, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The woman he still didn't know her name slept more peacefully now, her fever finally breaking. Jonas watched the sun rise through the window, exhaustion pulling at his bones, and wondered at the strange turn his life had taken. Less than 12 hours ago, he'd been alone, drowning in whiskey and memories. Now he had an unconscious Apache woman in his bed. Unknown enemies probably tracking her to his doorstep, and a feeling in his chest that he thought was dead forever. The terrifying, exhilarating sensation of caring whether someone lived or died. He heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching and tensed his hand, tightening on his rifle. But it was just Billy Coltrane, his sometimes hired hand, riding up to start the morning chores. Billy was a good kid, barely 20, eager to learn ranching, and too naive to know that Jonas was a terrible teacher. Jonas met him at the door before he could knock. "Not today, Billy." The young man's eager smile faltered. "But Mr. Hale, the cattle need—" "I said not today." Jonas's tone brooked no argument. "Take the day off. I'll pay you anyway. Just stay in town." Billy's eyes, sharp despite his youth, flicked past Jonas to the interior of the house. "You all right, Mr. Hale? You look like you've been through hell." "I'm fine. Just need some time alone, that's all." Jonas began to close the door, but Billy's hand shot out, stopping it. "There's talk in town," Billy said quietly, his boyish face suddenly serious. "Riders came through yesterday asking about an Apache woman. Rough-looking men, armed heavy. They're offering gold for information." He paused, his eyes meeting Jonas's with an understanding that seemed too old for his years. "Just thought you should know." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Appreciate the warning. Now get going." Billy nodded slowly and turned back to his horse. But before he mounted, he looked back one more time. "Mr. Hale, whatever you're doing, be careful. Those men, they had the look of killers." Jonas watched him ride away, dust rising in a plume behind his horse, and felt the weight of the choice he'd made settle more heavily on his shoulders. He'd known there would be consequences, but hearing it confirmed hired guns gold for information, a town full of people who'd sell out their own mothers for a price, made it real in a way that chilled his blood. He returned to the bedroom to find her awake, those black eyes tracking him with a mixture of suspicion and something else he couldn't quite name. Her hand was still clutched around the leather pouch at her neck. "You're still here," she said, her voice rough but stronger than it had been. "It's my house," Jonas replied, setting his rifle aside and checking her bandage. "No fresh bleeding. Good. Where else would I be?" "I thought—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I thought you might have come to your senses. Left me. Called the men hunting me." Jonas met her gaze steadily. "I don't have much in the way of sense these days, and I already told you I don't run and I don't abandon people." She studied him for a long moment, and he felt exposed under that searching gaze, as if she could see straight through to all the broken pieces he kept hidden. "You're a fool, then. Those men will kill you for helping me." "They can try." Jonas pulled the blanket up over her shoulders. "What's your name?" She hesitated, and he could see the internal debate playing across her face. Trust was clearly not something she gave easily. He understood that, recognized it in himself. "Naya," she said finally. "Naya Rivers." Jonas Hale. He offered his hand, then realized how absurd the gesture was, a formal handshake with a woman he'd just pulled half dead from a canyon. But she surprised him by taking it, her grip weak but deliberate. Why Jonas Hale? The question again, but different this time. She genuinely wanted to understand. Why risk everything for me? Jonas looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of her bronze skin against his sun-weathered palm, and tried to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. 3 years ago I buried my wife, he said quietly. Since then I've been going through the motions, breathing, eating, working, but I wasn't really alive, just existing. When I found you last night bleeding in that canyon, you had an arrow aimed at my heart. You know what my first thought was? She shook her head slightly. I thought finally something that matters. Whether you killed me or I saved you, either way, I'd feel something real again, something besides the numbness. He released her hand and stood moving to the window to stare out at the land he'd built with Margaret, the land that had become both prison and sanctuary. So maybe I'm helping you because I'm selfish, because saving you means I get to feel alive again, even if just for a little while. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. When Naya finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it yet. Your wife, how did she die? Fever. The word came out flat, emotionless, the way he'd trained himself to say it. Came on fast, took her in 3 days. I tried everything, every remedy, every prayer, every desperate bargain with God I could think of. Nothing worked. She just slipped away. He turned back to face her. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save you. Naya's eyes glistened with something that might have been tears, but she blinked them away. The men hunting me, they're not just hired guns. Their leader, Silas Kane, She struggled for words. He's a devil, and he wants what I carry. Jonas glanced at the leather pouch she still clutched. What is it? Death, she said simply. For my people if Kane gets it. Life if I can get it home safely. She closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her features. My father was the keeper of our sacred places. Before he died, he gave me a map to the last hidden stronghold of our tribe, the place where our elders, our children, our future hides. Cain tortured him for it, killed him when he wouldn't talk. But my father had already given it to me. Jonas felt something cold settle in his stomach. A map to an Apache stronghold. Jesus Christ, Naya, do you know what happens if Cain finds that, or if the army gets wind of it? Massacre, she said bluntly. They'll kill everyone. That's why I was running, trying to get far enough away that Cain's men would lose my trail. Then I could circle back home. Her hand tightened on the pouch. But I made a mistake. Let them get too close. One of them got a lucky shot before I killed him. You killed one of them, Jonas asked, though he wasn't sure why that surprised him. He'd seen the fierce light in her eyes, the way she'd held that bow steady even while bleeding out. 3? Naya corrected a grim smile, touching her lips. But there are at least a dozen more with Cain. Too many for me to fight alone, even if I wasn't wounded. She looked at him directly. Too many for you to fight too, even with your rifle and your soldier's training. How did you know I was a soldier? The way you move, the way you bandaged my wound, the way you assess threats even when you're trying to appear casual." Her smile turned sad. "I've seen enough soldiers to recognize one even when he's trying to forget what he was." Jonas moved back to the chair beside the bed, suddenly feeling every year of his age, every scar on his soul. "What's your plan, assuming you survive long enough to make one?" "I heal. I get strong. I run again." She said it like it was simple, like she hadn't just barely escaped death. "And you forget you ever saw me. When Cain comes, and he will come, you tell him I was here but I left. Give him a direction, any direction but the right one. Maybe that buys you your life." "I already told you." "I know you don't run and you don't abandon people." Naya interrupted, her voice sharp despite her weakness. "But I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be smart. This isn't your fight, Jonas Hale. You've already done more than anyone could expect. Don't die for me. I'm not worth it." Jonas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on hers. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here until you're healed enough to travel safely. I'm going to make sure no one Cain, the army, or anyone else finds you. When you're ready, I'll help you get home to your people. And then if you want, I'll help you take that map back from Cain if he manages to get it." "You can't." "I can and I will." His voice was firm, final. "I've spent 3 years in hell, Naya. 3 years wishing I'd died with Margaret. But maybe this is why I'm still here. Maybe I was meant to find you in that canyon. Maybe I was meant to help you save your people." He paused, something fierce and long dormant stirring in his chest. "Or maybe I'm just a fool like you said. Either way, you're stuck with me." For the first time since he'd found her, Naya smiled. Really smiled, not just that grim twist of her lips, but something genuine that transformed her entire face. "You're definitely a fool, Jonas Hale, but perhaps—" She hesitated, then continued softly. "Perhaps you're my fool. For now." The words settled between them like a promise, fragile and dangerous and full of possibility. Jonas felt that crack in his heart widen a little more, letting in a sliver of light he'd thought was gone forever. Outside, the sun climbed higher into a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The cattle lowed in the distance, normal ranch sounds that belied the storm brewing on the horizon. Jonas knew Billy's warning was just the beginning. Cain would come probably soon, and when he did, blood would spill on this land that had already seen too much death. But for now, in this quiet moment with Naya alive and safe in his bed, Jonas allowed himself something he hadn't felt in 3 long years: hope. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was probably going to get him killed, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The days that followed moved with a strange rhythm. Jonas had forgotten existed, the rhythm of caring for another human being, of measuring time, not in bottles emptied, but in small victories won. Naya's fever broke completely on the 2nd day, and by the 3rd she was sitting up in bed, her dark eyes tracking his every movement, with a mixture of wariness and curiosity that reminded him of a wild horse deciding whether to trust. He brought her broth that first morning made from beef bones he'd been saving, and vegetables from the small garden Margaret had planted years ago, a garden he'd kept alive more out of stubborn habit than any real purpose. Naya took the bowl with both hands, inhaling the steam, and something in her expression softened. "You made this yourself?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. Jonas settled into the chair that had become his permanent station, his rifle always within reach. Ranch life doesn't leave much room for helplessness. You learn to cook, sew doctor, and do a dozen other things, or you don't survive. He watched her take a careful sip. "Besides, Margaret taught me. Said a man who couldn't feed himself was only half a man." Naya's lips curved into a small smile. "Your wife was wise." "That she was." The words came easier now. The sharp edge of grief dulled slightly by time, and perhaps by the presence of this woman who seemed to understand loss in ways most people couldn't. Stubborn, too. Insisted on teaching me even when I told her I'd just hire a cook. And yet here you are, making broth for a stranger. Naya took another sip, and Jonas noticed color returning to her cheeks. She would be proud, I think. The comment settled in his chest with unexpected warmth. Or she'd be furious I brought home someone who could get me killed. He managed a wry smile. She was practical about survival. Came from a family of pioneers who learned the hard way that sentiment got you buried. Naya studied him over the rim of the bowl. But you saved me anyway, despite the risk, despite the practical choice being to leave me in that canyon. She set the bowl aside carefully. Why does a practical man make an impractical choice? Jonas had been asking himself the same question for 3 days straight, and he still didn't have an answer that made sense. Maybe I'm tired of practical. Practical kept me alive after Margaret died, but it didn't give me much reason to stay alive. He met her gaze steadily. You needed help. For once, I could do something that mattered. That's reason enough. She was quiet for a long moment, and Jonas saw something shift in her expression, a wall coming down, perhaps, or a decision being made. My father used to say that the spirits guide us to where we're needed most, even when we don't understand why. Her fingers traced the edge of the blanket. I argued with him, told him that was just a way to avoid taking responsibility for our choices. But now, she gestured between them. Now I wonder if he was right. You think spirits guided me to that canyon? Jonas couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. I think you were there when I needed you, whether that's spirits or chance or something else. Naya shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at her wound. Does it matter? The result is the same. Jonas stood and moved to check her bandage, a routine he'd established to avoid dwelling too much on philosophical questions he couldn't answer. Let me see that wound. She tensed slightly, but allowed him to lift the blanket and examine the bandages. No fresh bleeding, no signs of infection spreading. Whatever battlefield medicine he remembered had apparently been enough. His fingers worked gently unwrapping the old cloth and replacing it with clean bandages from his dwindling supply. You have a gentle touch for a soldier, Naya observed, her voice carefully neutral. Margaret used to say the same thing. Jonas concentrated on his work, tying off the new bandage with practiced efficiency. Said it didn't match the hard man I pretended to be. And were you a hard man? Jonas sat back, considering the question. I was young when I joined the army, 18 and stupid, full of ideas about glory and honor. The war taught me different, taught me that hard men usually end up dead or broken, and sometimes both. He met her eyes. I learned to be hard enough to survive, but soft enough to remember why survival mattered. Margaret helped with that second part. Naya reached out suddenly, her hand covering his where it rested on the bed. The gesture was so unexpected that Jonas froze, acutely aware of the warmth of her skin, the strength still present in her fingers despite her injury. Thank you, she said simply, for remembering why it matters, for being soft enough to save me. Jonas didn't pull away, though every instinct told him he should. This connection forming between them, fragile as morning frost but undeniably present, terrified him more than Kane's hired guns or the prospect of the army discovering an Apache woman in his house. This was the kind of thing that led to hope, and hope was dangerous. Hope made you vulnerable. Hope could destroy you when it was inevitably crushed. But her hand remained on his, and he found he didn't want to break the contact, not yet. The moment shattered with the sound of hoofbeats approaching the house, multiple riders moving fast. Jonas was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window with the fluid motion of a man who'd done this 100 times before. Naya struggled to sit up straighter, her own hand reaching for the knife Jonas had placed on the bedside table for her protection. How many she whispered. Jonas peered through the gap in the curtains. 3. Don't recognize them. But even as he said it, something about the way they sat their horses, too confident, too easy, told him these weren't local ranchers or drifters looking for work. These were men accustomed to violence, and they'd come with purpose. Stay quiet, he ordered, moving toward the bedroom door. And stay hidden. If shooting starts, you get out that window and run, understand? Naya's jaw set in a stubborn line he was beginning to recognize. I won't leave you to. You will if I tell you to. Jonas's voice was hard, brooking no argument. That map you're carrying is worth more than my life, more than both our lives. You get it home no matter what. Promise me. For a heartbeat, rebellion flashed in her eyes. Then slowly she nodded. I promise. But Jonas, don't die for me, please. He wanted to make that promise in return, wanted to tell her he'd be careful that he'd survive this. But he'd learned long ago not to make promises he might not be able to keep. Instead, he just nodded once and stepped out of the bedroom, closing the door behind him. The three riders had pulled up in front of his porch by the time Jonas stepped outside, his rifle held casually but ready. They were exactly what he'd expected: hard men with harder eyes, guns worn low and easy. The one in the middle, a thick-shouldered man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, seemed to be the leader. "Help you, gentlemen?" Jonas asked, his voice friendly enough, but his finger resting near the trigger guard. Scarface smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hope so, friend. We're looking for someone. Apache woman wounded, probably came through this way a couple days back." He leaned forward in his saddle. "You seen anyone like that?" Jonas let a moment pass, as if considering. "Apache woman here." He shook his head slowly. "You boys are a long way off track. Nearest Apache territory is 30 miles south. Woman running wounded wouldn't make it this far north." The man to Scarface's left, lean and mean-looking with a knife scar across his knuckles, spat tobacco juice onto Jonas's dirt. "Weren't asking about Apache territory. Asked if you'd seen her. And I'm telling you no." Jonas's voice hardened slightly. "Now I've answered your question. You can ride on." Scarface's smile widened, and Jonas recognized the look in his eyes. He'd seen it before in men who enjoyed violence for its own sake. "See, here's the thing, friend. We got good information she came this way. Real good information. And Mr. Kane, he doesn't like being lied to. Makes him unfriendly." At the mention of Kane's name, Jonas felt ice slide down his spine, but he kept his expression neutral. "Don't know any Kane, and I don't particularly care about his feelings. I've told you what I know. Now you're on my property uninvited, and my hospitality's wearing thin." The third man, younger than the others, but with eyes just as dead, laughed. "Listen to him acting tough. Old man, you really want to die over some Apache squaw?" Jonas shifted his stance slightly, the rifle moving with him. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but all three men tensed. They recognized a man who knew how to use his weapon. "What I want is for you to get off my land. What happens after that is your choice." Scarface held up a hand, stopping his companions from whatever move they'd been about to make. "Easy now, no need for this to get bloody." But his hand was on his pistol, and Jonas knew that bloodshed was exactly where this was headed. "Tell you what, let us take a quick look around just to satisfy ourselves, and we'll be on our way. Won't take but a minute." "No." The word was flat final. "Mr. Kane is offering good money for information," Scarface continued, as if Jonas hadn't spoken. "Real good money. Gold. More than a broken-down rancher like you probably sees in a year. All you gotta do is—" I said no. Jonas raised the rifle slightly, not quite aiming it, but making his position clear. "You've got 3 seconds to turn those horses around. After that, I start shooting." For a moment, the tableau held 3 mounted gunmen against 1 man on a porch tension thick enough to choke on. Jonas watched their eyes reading the calculations happening behind them. They were weighing their options: rush him, and probably 1 or 2 of them die in the process, or retreat and come back with more men. Scarface made his decision. "All right, friend, we'll go. For now." He gathered his reins, but his eyes promised violence, deferred not avoided. "But you might want to reconsider. Mr. Kane always gets what he wants, one way or another." "Then Mr. Kane better learn disappointment," Jonas replied evenly. They wheeled their horses and rode off, not hurrying but not dawdling either. Jonas watched until they disappeared over the rise, then counted to 100 before lowering his rifle. His hands, he noticed, were steady. The old soldier's calm still lived in his bones, apparently even after years of disuse. He turned to find Naya standing in the doorway, her face pale, but her eyes burning with that fierce light he'd first seen in the canyon. She'd managed to pull on one of his old shirts over her bandages, the fabric hanging loose on her smaller frame. "I thought I told you to stay hidden," Jonas said, though there was no real heat in his words. "And I thought I told you not to die for me." She moved carefully to the porch rail, leaning against it for support. "They'll be back, with more men." "I know." Jonas set the rifle aside and moved to support her, his arm around her waist. She was trembling from weakness or fear or anger, he couldn't tell. "Come on, you shouldn't be up yet." But Naya pulled away from his support, standing on her own, despite the obvious effort it cost her. "No more hiding in bed while you face danger for me. Her jaw set stubbornly. If Kane's men are here, if they know I came this way, then we need a plan. A real one. Not just you playing hero until they overwhelm you with numbers. Jonas wanted to argue, wanted to tell her to rest and let him handle it. But looking at her spine straight, despite the pain eyes clear and determined, he recognized the futility of that approach. Nia Rivers wasn't the type to be protected. She was the type to stand and fight wounded or not. All right, he conceded. Let's make a plan, but inside where you can sit down before you tear those stitches. She allowed him to guide her back inside, settling into one of the chairs at his rough-hewn kitchen table. Jonas poured them both coffee, thick and black, the way he'd learned to drink it in the army, and sat across from her. How many men does Kane typically travel with? He asked. Nia wrapped her hands around the warm mug, gathering her thoughts. When he attacked our village, he had maybe 20, but he split them up to search for me after I escaped. The 3 you just saw, plus at least 9 more that I know of. Her expression darkened. Kane himself is worth 3 normal men in a fight. He's fast, brutal, and he never stops. I've seen him track prey for weeks without rest, without mercy. So we're looking at 12, maybe 13 men total. Jonas did the math in his head, and it wasn't encouraging. Even if I could get help from town, which I can't because most of them would sell us out for a gold piece, those aren't good odds. No, Nia agreed quietly. They're not. She met his eyes across the table. That's why you need to let me go. Tonight, while I still can. I'll draw them away from here and you... We've had this conversation. Jonas's voice was firm. You're not strong enough to run, and even if you were Kane's trackers would find you within a day. Your only chance is to heal completely, and that takes time we might not have. Nia's fingers tightened on the mug. Then what? We wait here for them to come with enough men to overrun your defenses, die together instead of separately. At least if I run, you have a chance. You can tell them I stole supplies and left. They might believe you. They won't. Jonas stood and moved to the window, looking out at the land he'd built with Margaret, the land that might become his grave. Scarface already suspects. He'll come back with Kane and more men, and they'll tear this place apart looking for you. Whether you're here or not, I'm a dead man the moment they decide I helped you. The words hung heavy in the air between them. Nia said nothing for a long moment, and when Jonas turned back to look at her, he saw tears tracking silently down her cheeks, the first tears he'd seen from her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Jonas. You saved my life, and all I've brought you is death. He crossed to her in 3 strides, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. They were cold despite the warm coffee trembling with emotion she'd kept locked down until now. Look at me, he commanded gently. When she met his eyes, he saw not just sorrow, but a depth of feeling that took his breath away. I made my choice with full knowledge of the consequences. You didn't force this on me. I chose you, Nia. I chose to save you, to protect you, and I'll keep choosing you every damn day until this is over. But why? The question broke from her like a sob. Why throw your life away for someone you barely know, for a stranger, for an Apache woman your people have been trying to destroy for decades? Jonas realized he was still holding her hands, their fingers intertwined like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Because when I found you in that canyon, you looked at me with an arrow aimed at my heart, and I felt alive for the first time in 3 years. Because you're fierce and brave, and you refuse to give up even when any sane person would. Because, he paused, forcing himself to speak the truth he'd been avoiding. Because I'm tired of being alone, tired of existing without living. And somehow, in the middle of this impossible situation, you make me want to fight for something again. Nia's tears fell faster now, but she was smiling through them, a tremulous, beautiful smile that transformed her entire face. You really are a fool, Jonas Hale. Probably the biggest one in Arizona territory, he agreed, surprising himself with a laugh that felt rusty from disuse. But if I'm going to be a fool, might as well be for something worthwhile. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, and they stayed like that for a long moment. 2 broken souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Jonas breathed in the scent of her sage and smoke, and something uniquely Nia, and felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This wasn't just about saving her anymore. This was about saving himself too, about finding a reason to believe that life could be more than just counting days until death. When they finally pulled apart, Naya's expression had changed. The tears were gone, replaced by a determined light that reminded Jonas why she'd survived when so many others hadn't. "All right," she said firmly. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to fight together, then I need to teach you about Cain, about how he thinks, how he tracks, how he kills. Because if we're going to have any chance of surviving, you need to understand exactly what kind of devil we're facing." Jonas settled back in his chair, coffee in hand, and listened as Naya began to speak. Her voice was steady now, clinical, as she described Silas Cain, not just his methods, but his history. How he'd been a cavalry officer once discharged for brutality that shocked even the army. How he'd turned his skills to bounty hunting, then to worse things, mercenary work for men who needed problems eliminated quietly. How he'd developed an obsession with Apache gold, with the legends of hidden strongholds and sacred treasures. "He found my father 2 months ago." Naya continued, her voice only wavering slightly on the word father. "Captured him during a supply run. Tortured him for 3 days trying to get the location of our hidden camp. My father—" She paused, swallowing hard. "My father was strong. He told Cain nothing. Just kept saying the sacred places would never belong to white men, that the spirits would protect them." "And Cain killed him for it," Jonas said quietly. Naya nodded. "Shot him in the back of the head and left him in the desert for the carrion birds. But before that, while Cain's men were distracted, my father managed to slip me a signal. Told me where to find the map he'd hidden, told me to run and never look back." Her hand moved unconsciously to the leather pouch at her neck. "I found it, took it, and ran. And Cain's been hunting me ever since." Jonas absorbed this pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "So it's not just about finding your people. It's personal for him now. You have something he wants and you embarrassed him by escaping. Worse than that." Naya leaned forward. "Cain thinks the sacred place holds gold. He doesn't understand that it's not treasure, it's our future, our last refuge. He thinks there's a fortune hidden there and he'll kill every man, woman, and child to get it." The enormity of what they were protecting hit Jonas like a physical blow. This wasn't just about saving Naya, or even about his own survival. This was about preventing a massacre, about protecting people who'd already suffered more than any people should have to endure. "How many of your people are in this hidden place?" he asked. "Maybe 60. Elders, children, women. The warriors are scattered, trying to draw army attention away from the camp. If Cain finds it—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Jonas stood and moved to the cabinet where he kept his maps, spreading them across the table. "Show me. Where is it?" Naya hesitated, her hand still protectively over the pouch. Trust was hard-earned, Jonas understood that. But after a moment, she carefully removed the leather pouch and emptied its contents onto the table, a piece of tanned hide folded carefully with markings that meant nothing to Jonas, but clearly meant everything to Naya. She unfolded it with reverent care, revealing a map drawn in natural dyes, red ochre, charcoal black, mineral green. It showed the landscape of southern Arizona in intricate detail, but from a perspective Jonas had never seen. Not the territorial maps of the army or the rough sketches of prospectors, but something deeper. A map that showed not just where things were, but what they meant. "Here," Naya pointed to a symbol in the southern section. "Devil's Canyon, your maps call it. But it's not a canyon. It's a maze of canyons, side passages, hidden valleys. My people have known these paths for generations. The sacred place is here." She indicated a small marking that looked like a handprint in a valley so hidden that you could pass within 100 yards and never see the entrance. Jonas studied the map, his military training kicking in automatically. He looked for water sources, defensive positions, escape routes. If Cain has trackers worth their salt, they'll find it eventually, hidden or not. "I know." Naya's voice was heavy. "That's why the map was supposed to stay with my father, passed down only when he was ready to die of old age. It was never supposed to be written down, never supposed to exist outside of memory. But he feared—" She touched the map gently. "He feared our people were being hunted to extinction. He wanted there to be a record, a way for survivors to find home, even if all the elders died." Jonas looked from the map to Naya's face, seeing the weight of responsibility she carried. You're not just protecting a place. You're protecting knowledge, history, your entire people's future. Yes. The single word carried the weight of the world. They spent the next hours studying the map together, Naya teaching Jonas the symbols, the hidden meanings, and the seemingly simple drawings. He learned that what looked like a simple mark for a water source actually indicated whether it was permanent or seasonal, whether it was safe to drink or alkaline. He learned that the paths marked weren't always the fastest routes, but the safest, the ones that offered concealment and escape. And as they worked, heads bent together over the ancient hide, Jonas felt that connection between them strengthen. It wasn't just attraction anymore, though. He couldn't deny that played a part. It was deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits, of two people who'd been broken by loss and were finding in each other a reason to fight, to hope, to believe that maybe tomorrow could be better than yesterday. The sun was setting by the time they finished painting the sky in those familiar shades of copper and crimson. Jonas carefully helped Naya fold the map and return it to its pouch, his fingers brushing hers in a contact that sent warmth racing up his arm. "We need to prepare," he said, forcing himself to focus on practical matters. "If Kane's scouts found this place, he'll be back within a day or two. We need defensive supplies, a fallback position." Naya nodded, already looking stronger than she had that morning. "I can help. I know traps, ambush tactics." "You can help by healing," Jonas interrupted firmly. "I need you at full strength, not tearing open your stitches trying to dig trenches." Her eyes flashed with frustration, but she nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But I can at least teach you, show you how my people fight, how to use the land itself as a weapon." And so they began. As darkness fell over the Arizona desert, Jonas Hale and Naya Rivers sat together in the lamplight, planning not just for survival, but for victory. She taught him tricks of Apache warfare, how to read signs in the dust, how to set snares that would slow mounted men, how to use the canyon echoes to confuse and disorient attackers. In return, Jonas shared what he knew from his Army days: field fortifications, kill zones, coordinated fire. Together they created a plan that was equal parts desperate and brilliant, a strategy that played to both their strengths and accepted their limitations. "It might work," Naya said finally, exhaustion evident in her voice, but hope kindling in her eyes. "If we're lucky, if we're smart, if the spirits favor us, it might actually work." Jonas helped her back to the bedroom, supporting her weight as they walked. She was stronger, but still weak, still healing. At the door she paused and turned to face him, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. "Jonas," she said softly, "if this goes wrong tomorrow or the next day, if Kane comes and we don't survive, I want you to know that finding you, being saved by you, it gave me something I thought I'd lost when my father died." "What's that?" he asked, his own hand covering hers. "Hope," she whispered. "You gave me hope that maybe there are still good people in this world. That maybe not all white men are enemies. That maybe—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "That maybe I'm not meant to face everything alone." Jonas felt his heart crack open a little wider, letting in more of that dangerous, beautiful light. He raised his free hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone, with infinite gentleness. "You're not alone anymore," he promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Naya leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, they held a warmth that made Jonas's breath catch. "Together," she echoed. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, with the promise of something neither had expected to find. Then Naya stepped back, breaking the contact but not the connection, and moved into the bedroom. Jonas stood in the doorway, long after she'd settled into bed, watching her in the lamplight, memorizing the curve of her face, the way her hair spread across his pillow, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. He was falling, had already fallen, and there was nothing to do but embrace it. Consequences be damned. Outside, the desert night sang its ancient song, Coyotes. Calling in the distance, wind whispering through the canyons, the subtle shift of sand and stone that marked the passage of time. Somewhere out there, Silas Kane was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, death was riding toward this small ranch on the edge of nowhere. But here in this moment, Jonas Hale felt more alive than he had in 3 years. Here, with Naya Rivers sleeping in his bed and hope blooming dangerously in his chest, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd found something worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, he would stand guard over this woman who'd stumbled wounded into his life and somehow stolen past every defense he'd built around his heart. Tonight, he would plan and prepare and do everything in his power to ensure they both saw another sunrise. And if Cain came with his hired guns and his devil's grin, well, Jonas Hale had been a soldier once. He knew how to fight. He knew how to survive. And now, for the first time in 3 long years, he had something precious to protect. Dawn came too soon and not soon enough. Jonas had spent the night alternating between watching Naya sleep and checking the perimeter, his body moving on old instincts while his mind churned through scenarios and possibilities. The coffee he'd made before first light was strong enough to strip paint, but it kept him sharp, kept him focused on what needed to be done. Naya found him in the barn an hour after sunrise, moving with more strength than she'd shown since he'd found her. She'd braided her long hair back from her face, and she wore a pair of his old work pants cinched tight with rope, one of his shirts tucked in. The clothes hung loose on her smaller frame, but something about seeing her in his things stirred something possessive and protective in Jonas's chest. "You should be resting," he said, not looking up from the tripwire he was rigging near the barn's eastern entrance. "I've rested enough." Naya crouched beside him, watching his hands work. "Show me what you're doing." Jonas glanced at her, saw the determination in her eyes, and knew arguing would be pointless. "Simple tripwire. Doesn't kill, just alerts. I've got 6 of these placed around the property perimeter. Anyone comes riding in hard will know before they're within rifle range." She nodded approvingly. "Good, but you're placing them too obviously. Cain's men will spot these." She reached out, adjusting the wire's position slightly, concealing it better in the shadow of a fence post. "There. Now it's invisible until you're on top of it." They worked together through the morning, Jonas learning from Naya's expertise in concealment while she absorbed his knowledge of fortification. She taught him how to use the desert itself, how to position mirror fragments to blind attackers at certain angles, how to dig shallow pits that would turn a horse's ankle without being obvious, how to use smoke and shadow to create confusion about their actual positions. "Your people have been fighting longer than mine have been on this continent," Jonas observed. Watching her camouflage a tripwire so perfectly, he lost sight of it, even knowing where it was. This kind of knowledge, it's not something you learn in a year or two. Naya's expression grew distant. "My people have been fighting to survive since the first white men came with their diseases and their greed. We learned because we had to. Every child grows up knowing that one day they might need to defend their family, their home, their very existence." She met his eyes. "You think I'm fierce? I'm nothing compared to what our grandmothers were. They fought Spanish conquistadors with nothing but stone knives and refused to break." Jonas felt the weight of that history, the generations of struggle and survival that had led to this moment. "And now you're fighting to save what's left." "What's left," Naya repeated softly, "is everything. Those 60 people in that hidden valley, they're not just survivors. They're our future, our children, our elders, our knowledge keepers. If Cain finds them—" She didn't finish, didn't need to. They continued working, the morning sun climbing higher and hotter. Jonas had never been one for idle conversation during work, but with Naya, silence felt natural, comfortable. They moved around each other with an ease that shouldn't have existed between 2 people who'd known each other for less than a week, anticipating each other's movements, working in harmony, like partners who'd done this 100 times before. Around midday, Billy Coltrane appeared on the ridge, riding slowly, his hands visible and empty. Jonas tensed, rifle ready, but the young man called out before getting too close. "Mr. Hale, it's just me. I'm alone." Jonas exchanged a glance with Naya, saw her slip toward cover with the fluid grace of a predator, then called back, "Come on in, Billy. Slow and easy." The young man rode into the yard, and Jonas saw immediately that something had shaken him. Billy's usual easy smile was gone, replaced by a grim set to his jaw that made him look older than his 20 years. "What is it?" Jonas asked, not lowering the rifle. Billy dismounted, tying his horse with hands that trembled slightly. Kane's in town, Mr. Hale. Rode in this morning with at least 15 men, maybe more. He swallowed hard. They're asking questions, offering gold, and people are talking. Jonas felt ice settle in his stomach. What are they saying? Everything. Billy's voice was bitter. About how you sent me away. About how you've been holed up here for days. About supplies you bought that were too much for one man. He met Jonas's eyes. Mr. Hale, half the town thinks you're hiding her. The other half knows you are. From the shadows of the barn, Naya emerged, and Billy's eyes widened. Ma'am, he said, nodding respectfully despite his obvious shock at seeing an Apache woman on Jonas's ranch. Has anyone taken Kane's gold? Jonas demanded, his mind already calculating how much time they had. Billy shifted uncomfortably. Old man Hutchins at the mercantile told Kane about the supplies, about you looking worried about... He stopped, his young face flushing with anger. About how you looked like a man with secrets to hide. Damn. Jonas ran a hand through his hair. How long do we have? Maybe hours, maybe less. Billy took a step forward. Mr. Hale, I came to warn you, but also to help. I know how to shoot, and I'm not afraid of... No. Jonas's voice was firm. You've done enough, Billy, more than enough. You ride back to town, you tell anyone who asks that you came out here and found the place empty. You never saw me, never saw her. Understand? Billy's jaw set stubbornly. But Mr. Hale... That's an order, son. Jonas softened his tone. I won't have your blood on my conscience. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away on this fight. He's right, Naya added, stepping forward. What's coming, it's not your battle. You've shown honor by warning us. That's enough. Billy looked between them, and Jonas saw the war playing out behind his young eyes, the desire to help versus the wisdom of retreat. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. All right, but Mr. Hale... He pulled something from his saddlebag, a box of ammunition. At least take this, and... He hesitated. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is right. Helping her. Standing up to men like Kane. My pa, before he died, he always said a man's measured by who he helps, not who he hurts. Jonas took the ammunition, his throat tight. Your pa was a smart man. You honor his memory by staying alive and staying out of this. Billy mounted his horse, but before he rode off, he looked at Naya. Ma'am, give him hell. Then he was gone, dust rising in his wake. Naya moved to stand beside Jonas, and he felt her hand slip into his, a small gesture that somehow steadied the churning in his gut. Good kid, she observed. Too good for this world sometimes, Jonas agreed. He squeezed her hand once, then released it. We need to finish preparations. If Kane's moving this fast, we've got maybe 3-4 hours before he arrives. They worked with renewed urgency, every movement now weighted with the knowledge that time was running out. Jonas checked and rechecked his rifles, 3 of them positioned at strategic points around the house. Naya prepared her bow, testing the string, selecting arrows with the care of a surgeon, choosing instruments. I haven't asked, Jonas said, watching her work. Can you shoot that thing in your condition? Naya drew the bow experimentally, and though Jonas saw the flash of pain cross her face, her arms were steady. I've shot with worse injuries. The question is whether I can shoot enough times before the wound opens again. She lowered the bow. I'll make each shot count. They were carrying supplies from the barn to the house when Jonas noticed Naya had gone still. Her head tilted like a wolf, scenting danger. What is it? Dust, she said quietly, pointing to the southern horizon. A lot of it, coming fast. Jonas saw it then, a plume of dust rising in the distance, too large for a few riders too directed to be wild horses. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. They're early. Damn it, they're early. They ran for the house, Jonas's mind racing through the defensive plan they'd created. It wasn't perfect, wasn't even close to finished, but it would have to do. He grabbed Naya's arm as they reached the porch. Remember what we discussed. You take the bedroom window high ground. I'll take the main floor. We create crossfire, force them to divide their attention. His hand tightened on her arm. And Naya. If it goes bad, if they breach the house, you run. You take that map, and you run like hell, and you don't look back. Fire flashed in her eyes. We've had this conversation, Jonas. I'm not leaving you. You will if I order it. That map is more important than both of us. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers for a brief, desperate moment. Promise me. Promise me you'll save your people if it comes to that. For a heartbeat, she was silent. Then, with obvious reluctance, I promise, but Jonas, don't make me keep that promise. Don't you dare die on me. Before he could respond, before he could voice the thousand things suddenly pressing against his throat, the sound of hoofbeats reached them, many horses moving fast. Jonas released her, and they took their positions. Jonas, crouching behind the overturned table he'd positioned near the front window. Naya disappearing up the stairs to the bedroom. The riders came into view, and Jonas felt his blood run cold. 15 men, just like Billy had said, maybe more. They spread out as they approached professional and practiced forming a loose semicircle around the house. And at their center, sitting tall on a black horse that seemed carved from midnight itself, was a man who could only be Silas Kane. Even at a distance, Kane was imposing. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver-shot black hair, and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty etched into every line. He wore a long coat despite the heat, and Jonas caught the glint of multiple weapons, pistols, knife, maybe more. This was a man who'd built a life on violence and wore it like a second skin. Kane raised a hand and his men stopped advancing, holding position about 50 yards out within rifle range, but not suicidally close. Smart. The man was smart, and that made him more dangerous than a dozen mindless thugs. Jonas Hale, Kane's voice carried clearly across the distance, deep and resonant. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Jonas remained silent, his rifle trained on Kane's chest, waiting. Come now, Hale. We both know she's in there. Kane's smile was visible even at this distance. My men saw her. The boy you sent away confirmed it. There's no point in denying what we both know is true. Still, Jonas said nothing. Beside him, he'd positioned a mirror fragment just right, and he could see Naya in the upstairs window, her bow-drawn arrow nocked and ready. Her face was calm, focused every inch the warrior. Kane's smile faded. I'm a reasonable man, Hale. I'm prepared to be generous. You hand over the Apache woman and whatever she's carrying, and you walk away from this alive. Hell, I'll even throw in gold for your trouble. $500. That's more than this dried-up ranch is worth. Jonas broke his silence. Not interested in your gold, Kane. And the woman stays with me. Ah, so she is there. Kane's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. You know, Hale, I admire stubbornness in a man. It shows character. But there's a line between stubborn and stupid. And you're dancing on it. He leaned forward in his saddle. I've got 15 men here. You've got, one rifle too. Even if you're a crack shot, the math doesn't favor you. Math never was my strong suit. Jonas called back, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. But I'm pretty good at making problems go away. You want to test whether you're a problem I can solve? Kane laughed a sound without humor. I like you, Hale. In another life, we might have been friends. But I'm afraid I can't let sentiment interfere with business. You see, that woman has something I need, something I've spent considerable time and money pursuing, and I always get what I pay for. Not today, you don't. The smile disappeared from Kane's face, entirely replaced by something cold and reptilian. Last chance, Hale. Send her out and you live. Force my hand and I'll burn this place to the ground with both of you in it. Jonas's response was to shift his rifle slightly, the movement deliberate and clear in its meaning. Around the yard, he saw Kane's men tense hands moving to weapons. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for someone to tip it into violence. Kane stared at Jonas for a long moment, and Jonas stared back unflinching. He'd faced down death before in the war and the years of grief after Margaret died. Death didn't scare him, but the thought of failing Naya of Kane getting that map and slaughtering her people, that terrified him to his bones. So be it, Kane said finally, his voice flat and emotionless. Boys, I want her alive if possible, but Hale, his smile returned sharp as broken glass. Hale dies slow. It happened fast after that. Kane's men split, half circling toward the barn, the other half advancing on the house. Jonas waited until they were within 40 yards, then squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, and Scarface, the man from yesterday, the one with the knife scar, toppled from his horse with a hole in his chest. Chaos erupted. Return fire peppered the house wood, splintering glass, shattering. Jonas ducked, moved to his second position, fired again. Another man down. Above him he heard the distinctive twang of Naya's bow, followed by a scream as one of the men circling toward the barn took an arrow through the shoulder. Fire arrows! Kane's voice cut through the gunfire. Burn them out! Jonas's blood turned to ice. Fire was the one thing they couldn't defend against effectively. He risked a glance toward the barn and saw men with torches, flames already licking at the dry wood. The structure went up like kindling smoke, billowing black and thick. Jonas! Naya's voice from upstairs, urgent. The barn's gone. They're trying to circle around. He'd expected this, planned for it even, but seeing it happen was different. Jonas fired at the men trying to flank them, drove them back temporarily, but there were too many. For every one he hit, two more advanced. His first rifle was empty, and he grabbed the second, fingers moving automatically through the reload sequence he'd practiced 10,000 times in his army days. An arrow streaked past his head so close he felt the air move and buried itself in the wall behind him. Then another, and another. Not from Naya, these were coming from outside. Kane's men had archers of their own. Naya, Jonas shouted. Get down! They've got... The window above him exploded in a shower of glass. Jonas heard Naya cry out, and his heart stopped. He abandoned his position, taking the stairs 3 at a time, bullets chasing him, wood exploding where his feet had been a second before. He burst into the bedroom to find Naya on the floor, blood running down the side of her face from a glass cut, but alive, conscious, already reaching for her bow. I'm fine, she gasped before he could ask. Just glass, I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. Blood was seeping through the bandage on her side. The wound had reopened. Jonas saw her face go pale, saw her sway, and caught her before she could fall. No, she whispered, trying to push him away. No, I can still fight. I can... You're bleeding out. Jonas held her firmly, his mind racing through impossible options. The house was surrounded, the barn was burning, and Naya was wounded again. They couldn't win this fight. Couldn't even survive it, not like this. More gunfire from below, closer now. They were in the house. Kane's men had breached the ground floor. Jonas made a decision. The only decision he could make. He hauled Naya to her feet, supporting her weight, and moved to the window. Not the shattered front window, but the smaller one facing the back canyon. Below, maybe 20 feet down, was rough ground that sloped toward the canyon ridges. Dangerous, but survivable. What are you doing? Naya demanded, though her voice was weak. Saving your life. Jonas ripped down the bed sheet, tied one end to the bed frame, threw the other out the window. It didn't reach the ground, but it would get them close enough. Climb down. When you hit the ground, run for Copper Canyon. Hide in the rocks where I found you. I'll find you. I'm not leaving you. You are. Jonas grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Naya, listen to me. That map is more important than my life. Your people are more important than my life. You promised me you'd run if it came to this. Well, it's come to this. So run. Tears streaked through the blood on her face. Jonas, please. Please don't make me do this. From below, footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots, multiple men. Jonas had seconds, maybe less. He kissed her hard and desperate, and full of everything he couldn't say, then physically lifted her toward the window. Run, he commanded. Run and live. That's an order. Naya's hands gripped his shirt, her eyes pleading. I'll come back for you. I swear it. I'll come back. I know. Jonas helped her out the window, watched her grip the sheet, begin her descent. Now, go. She went sliding down the makeshift rope, hitting the ground hard but rolling with the impact. Jonas watched her gain her feet, saw her look back up at him with a face full of anguish and fury and love. Then she turned and ran, disappearing into the evening shadows toward the canyon. Jonas turned from the window just as the bedroom door crashed open. 3 men burst in, guns drawn. He recognized the lean one from yesterday, the one with the scarred knuckles. The man's eyes swept the room, saw the open window, the sheet hanging down. She's running, he shouted. She went out the back, Get her. Kane's voice from the hallway, sharp with command. I want that map, go. 2 of the men turned to run, but Jonas stepped forward, his rifle coming up. You want her, you go through me first. The man with scarred knuckles turned back his gun, aimed at Jonas's chest. Cain said you die slow, old man. Drop the rifle. Jonas's finger was on the trigger. He could take one, maybe two of them with him, but there were too many, and killing these men wouldn't stop Cain, wouldn't save Naya. Slowly hating every second of it, he lowered the rifle. Smart man, Scarred Knuckles said, then swung the butt of his pistol in a vicious arc that caught Jonas across the temple. The world exploded in stars and pain, and Jonas went down hard. Through the ringing in his ears, through the darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision, he heard boots running, heard Cain's voice issuing orders. Find her! She can't have gotten far not wounded, and someone get Hale secured. I want him alive. I've got questions for him, and he's going to answer every single one. Rough hands grabbed Jonas, dragged him downstairs. He tried to fight, but his body wouldn't respond properly, his limbs heavy and uncoordinated. They threw him into a chair in his own kitchen, and someone scarred Knuckles, he thought, tied his hands behind him with rope that bit into his wrists. Cain entered the room, and up close he was even more intimidating. Tall enough that he had to duck slightly through the doorway with eyes the color of dirty ice and a presence that seemed to fill the entire space. He pulled up a chair, reversed it, and sat down facing Jonas, his arms crossed over the back. Mr. Hale, Cain said pleasantly, as if they were discussing the weather, you've cost me a great deal of time and money. 3 of my best men dead, several more wounded, and the woman still running free. He leaned forward. I'm not a patient man by nature, but I'm willing to give you one chance to make this right. Tell me where she's going. Tell me where her people are hiding. Do that, and I'll make your death quick. Jonas spat blood onto the floor at Cain's feet. Go to hell. Cain's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those cold eyes. Something that might have been respect, or might have been the anticipation of violence. I've been to hell, Mr. Hale. Spent years there during the war. Found I quite liked the scenery. He stood walking slowly around Jonas's chair. You know what I learned in hell? Everyone breaks eventually. Everyone. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point. He nodded to Scarred Knuckles, and pain exploded in Jonas's ribs as the man's fist connected. Once, twice, 3 times. Jonas tasted blood, felt something crack, but he kept his jaw clenched, refused to cry out. Where is she going? Cain asked again, his voice still pleasant. Jonas raised his head, met Cain's eyes, and smiled through bloody teeth. Wouldn't tell you if I knew, which I don't. She's smarter than both of us. She'll disappear and you'll never find her. Cain studied him for a long moment. You love her. That's what this is about. You've fallen for some Apache savage, and now you're willing to die for her. He laughed, the sound devoid of humor. How touching, how utterly stupid. Maybe, Jonas conceded, his voice rough. But I've had a good run, and if my dying means she lives, means her people survive. That's a trade I'll make every damn time. Something shifted in Cain's expression, a flash of genuine anger breaking through the pleasant facade. You self-righteous fool! You think this is about love, about doing the right thing. He leaned in close, his breath hot on Jonas's face. It's about money, gold, enough to set me up for life, and some broken-down rancher and his Apache whore aren't going to stand between me and what's mine. Jonas's vision was blurring from the pain, but he held Cain's gaze. Not yours. Never was. Never will be. Cain straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. Very well, Mr. Hale. If you won't tell me willingly, we'll do this the hard way. He walked toward the door, paused, looked back. I'm going to find her. I'm going to take that map, and then I'm going to slaughter every man, woman, and child in that hidden valley. And when I'm done, when their bodies are rotting in the sun, I'll come back here and tell you all about it before I let you die. His smile was the cruelest thing Jonas had ever seen. Think about that while we're gone. Think about all the blood that's going to be on your hands because you chose some Apache bitch over common sense. He was gone then, his men following, leaving Jonas tied to the chair in his destroyed kitchen. Through the window, Jonas could see the barn, still smoldering smoke rising into the darkening sky. He could hear Cain shouting orders, organizing search parties, sending men into the canyon after Naya. Jonas closed his eyes, pain radiating from his ribs, his head a dozen other places. But worse than the physical pain was the knowledge that Naya was out there wounded and alone with Kane's hunters closing in. He'd saved her from the house, given her a chance, but was it enough? Would she make it to safety? Would she survive? Please, he whispered to whatever god might be listening to the spirits Naya believed in, to the ghost of Margaret watching from beyond. Please let her make it. Let her live. That's all I ask. The house creaked around him, settling into its wounds. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in those familiar colors of blood and fire. And somewhere in the darkness of Copper Canyon, Naya Rivers was running for her life, carrying the future of her people in a leather pouch around her neck. Jonas pulled at his bonds, testing them, feeling them cut into his wrists. He wasn't done yet, wasn't finished fighting. As long as there was breath in his body, as long as his heart kept beating, he would find a way. He would escape these ropes, find Naya, and stop Kane, or die trying. Either way, the choice had been made. The line had been crossed, and Jonas Hale discovered that loving someone, truly desperately loving them, could give a man the strength to endure anything, to fight impossible odds, to believe in miracles. All he needed now was for one of those miracles to come through. The rope burned into Jonas's wrists as he worked them back and forth, his blood making the fibers slick. Pain shot through his ribs with every movement, every breath, but he kept going. He'd been a soldier long enough to know that pain was just information, your body telling you it was still alive, still capable of fighting. And Jonas Hale wasn't done fighting. Outside, he could hear Kane's men mounting up their voices, carrying through the broken windows. They were organizing search parties, dividing into groups to cover more ground. Jonas counted the voices, at least 8 men staying to hunt Naya, maybe 3 left behind to guard him. The odds weren't good, but they were better than they'd been 10 minutes ago. He twisted his wrists harder, feeling skin tear, feeling fresh blood flow. The rope was old, dried out from years in the Arizona heat. If he could just get enough moisture, enough blood, maybe it would loosen. His fingers searched blindly for the knot found. It began working at it with nails he'd broken against the hemp. The kitchen door opened and Scarred Knuckles entered, a whiskey bottle in one hand. Jonas's whiskey, from the looks of it. The man took a long pull, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and studied Jonas with eyes that held casual cruelty. "Boss says I'm to keep you alive." The man said, his words slightly slurred. "Didn't say nothing about keeping you comfortable, though." He took another drink, set the bottle down on the table Jonas had overturned earlier. "You got any idea how much gold Kane's paying us for this job? Enough that I could buy 10 ranches like this one. 20, maybe." Jonas said nothing, just kept working the knot behind his back, his fingers slippery with blood, but gaining purchase. Scarred Knuckles moved closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You really think that Apache bitch is worth dying for? She ain't nothing but a savage. Her kind's been killing white folks for years. Deserves what's coming to her and to all her people." "That what you tell yourself?" Jonas asked, his voice rough. "That it's justified? That you're not just a mercenary killer working for gold?" The backhanded slap came fast, snapping Jonas's head to the side. Stars exploded in his vision, adding to the constellation already there from the earlier blow. But it also gave him the cover he needed to work the knot harder, to feel it finally start to give. "You got a smart mouth for a dead man," Scarred Knuckles growled. He grabbed another chair, spun it around, and sat facing Jonas the same way Kane had. "Let me tell you something about your precious Apache woman. You know what she did to my brother? Put an arrow through his throat, left him choking on his own blood in the desert. So yeah, when we catch her, I'm going to make sure she suffers. Going to make sure she knows what it feels like to..." He never finished the sentence. Jonas's hands came free, and he moved on pure instinct and rage. His fist connected with Scarred Knuckles' jaw, the impact sending shockwaves of pain up his arm, but also sending the man sprawling backward. The chair clattered to the floor, and Scarred Knuckles went for his gun. Jonas was faster. He grabbed the whiskey bottle from the table and brought it down hard on the man's skull. Glass shattered, whiskey and blood mixing, and Scarred Knuckles went limp. For a moment, Jonas just stood there, breathing hard, his ribs screaming protest, his head spinning. Then training kicked in. He searched Scarred Knuckles quickly, found a pistol, a knife ammunition. The other 2 guards would have heard the commotion he had seconds before they came to investigate. The back door was his best option. Jonas moved through his destroyed kitchen, past the overturned furniture and shattered dishes. Memories of Margaret's careful homemaking reduced to debris. He reached the door, eased it open, and slipped into the gathering darkness. The other two guards were rounding the corner of the house, drawn by the noise. Jonas pressed himself flat against the wall, waiting. When they passed, focused on the back door he'd just exited, he struck. The knife was in his hand, familiar and deadly, and he'd learned in the war how to use it silently, efficiently. The first guard went down without a sound, Jonas's hand clamping over his mouth as the blade found its mark. The second turned, eyes widening, reaching for his gun. Jonas threw the knife, a skill he'd learned from a Cherokee scout during the war, and it buried itself in the man's chest. He went down hard, and Jonas was on him in an instant, retrieving the knife, checking for more weapons. 3 down. But that still left 8 men in the canyon, hunting Naya and Kane himself leading them. Jonas gathered what weapons he could carry, 2 pistols, the knife, a rifle from one of the dead guards, and checked his ammunition. Not enough. Never enough. But it would have to do. He moved toward the canyon, following the path he knew Naya would have taken. The sun had set fully now, darkness spreading across the desert like spilled ink. But Jonas knew this land, knew every rock, every shadow, every hiding place. He'd walked these paths with Margaret during their early years when the ranch was new and hope was still fresh. Now those same paths might lead him to Naya, or to his death, or to both. The canyon opened before him, the rock walls rising like ancient guardians on either side. In the distance, he could hear voices, Kane's men calling to each other, coordinating their search. They had torches, bright points of light moving through the darkness like malevolent stars. Jonas counted them. 6 visible torches, which meant at least 2 men were searching in darkness using stealth instead of light. Smart. Kane was too smart, and it terrified Jonas to think of him closing in on Naya. He moved deeper into the canyon, using shadows and stone for cover, his soldier's instincts coming back like muscle memory. Every sound registered: the scuff of a boot on stone, the distant call of a night bird, the whisper of wind through the rocks. He filtered them, categorized them, used them to build a map of where Kane's men were, where they were heading. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. A sharp intake of breath, pained and quickly suppressed. It came from above, from a narrow ledge about 15 feet up the canyon wall. The same area where he'd found Naya that first night. Jonas looked up, squinting into the darkness, and saw movement. A shadow separating itself from other shadows, a shape that resolved into a person pressed flat against the rock face. Naya. She was alive. Relief flooded through Jonas so powerfully it nearly drove him to his knees. But relief was immediately chased by fear, because he could see, even in the dim starlight, that she was in bad shape. The climb to that ledge had cost her blood, stained the rock below her position, a trail that Kane's trackers would find the moment they brought their torches close enough. Jonas looked around, desperately calculating angles and distances. The ledge Naya occupied was accessible from above, where the canyon wall sloped more gently. But getting there meant circling around, and the blood trail led directly to her position. Kane's men would find her within minutes. He had to draw them away. Had to give her time. Jonas stepped out from cover, deliberately making noise, making himself visible. He fired a shot into the air, the report echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. "Kane!" he shouted, his voice carrying. "You want someone to hunt me!" The response was immediate. Torches turned in his direction. Voices shouted, and he heard Kane's distinctive bellow cutting through the chaos. "Hell, he's escaped! Forget the woman, get him!" Jonas didn't wait to see if they'd take the bait. He ran, heading deeper into the canyon, away from Naya's position. Behind him, he heard pursuit boots pounding on stone, men cursing as they navigated the treacherous ground in darkness. Perfect. He just needed to keep them focused on him, keep them moving away from Naya long enough for her to escape or hide more effectively. The canyon narrowed ahead, splitting into 2 paths. Jonas took the left fork, the one that led to a box canyon, a dead end. Terrible strategy normally, but he wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to buy time with his life if necessary. He reached the box canyon and spun around, rifle ready, back pressed against the stone wall. The torches appeared at the canyon mouth, 3 of them held by men who approached more cautiously now, weapons drawn. They knew they had him trapped. "Nowhere to run, Hale!" one of them called. Jonas recognized the voice, the young one from the house, the kid with dead eyes. Boss wants you alive, but he didn't say we couldn't rough you up some. Make you pay for the men you killed. Jonas raised the rifle. You want me. Come and get me, but I guarantee at least one of you doesn't walk away. They hesitated, and Jonas saw them calculating the same odds he'd already figured. In the narrow confines of the box canyon, even wounded and exhausted, he could probably take 2 of them before they got him. Maybe all 3 if he was lucky, or they were stupid. They knew it too. Where's the woman? This voice was Kane's, coming from behind his men, out of direct line of fire. Smart bastard. Tell me where she is, Hale, and I'll make this quick. You've got my word. Your word? Jonas laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. Your word isn't worth the breath you waste speaking it, Kane. You're a murderer, a mercenary, and a coward who hides behind other men's guns. The insult had the desired effect. Kane pushed through his men, torch held high, his face twisted with rage. A coward. I've killed more men than you've ever met, Hale. Face down Apache warriors, Mexican bandits, Union soldiers. I've walked through blood ankle deep and never flinched. And you dare call me a coward? I dare. Jonas said, his rifle trained on Kane's chest. Because a brave man doesn't torture old men for information, doesn't hunt wounded women through canyons, doesn't plan to slaughter children for gold. He spat blood onto the canyon floor. You're not a warrior, Kane. You're just a rabid dog that needs to be put down. Kane's hand dropped to his pistol faster than Jonas expected. The shot came simultaneously with Jonas's 2 reports that sounded like one. Jonas felt something punch into his left shoulder, spinning him halfway around. His own shot went wide, chipping stone near Kane's head. Then the other men were firing muzzle flashes, lighting the canyon like lightning. Jonas dropped and rolled, returning fire, and one of the torchbearers went down, screaming. But there were too many, too much fire, and Jonas felt another bullet crease his side, another graze his leg. He was going to die here. The thought came with strange clarity and no fear. He was going to die in this box canyon, buying time with his blood for the woman he'd known less than a week, but loved more than he'd thought possible to love again. There were worse ways to go, worse reasons to die. But then impossibly he heard a sound that made his heart soar and his stomach drop simultaneously. The distinctive twang of a bowstring followed by a gurgling scream, then another and another. Naya, no! Jonas shouted because he knew what that sound meant. She hadn't run. Hadn't hidden. She'd circled around, climbed above their position, and now she was raining arrows down on Kane's men from the canyon rim. Get her! Kane roared, and his men scattered, some returning fire upward, others scrambling for cover. Bring her down! But Naya was already moving, her shadow flitting across the canyon rim like a ghost. Another arrow found its mark, and another of Kane's men fell. The remaining torchbearer dropped his light to use both hands for his rifle, and the canyon plunged into deeper darkness, broken only by muzzle flashes. Jonas used the chaos to move, dragging himself behind a boulder, trying to assess his wounds. The shoulder was bad, he could feel bone grinding when he moved it, but not immediately fatal. The side and leg were manageable. He was still in the fight. Above, Naya's bow sang again, but this time Jonas heard her cry out in pain. A rifle shot had found her, or she'd torn her wound open again, or both. His blood turned to ice as he heard the sound of something. Someone falling, hitting the canyon wall, sliding down. Got her! Someone shouted triumphantly. She's down! Jonas was moving before conscious thought, abandoning cover, abandoning strategy, driven by pure desperate need. He found her crumpled at the base of the canyon wall, blood pooling beneath her, her bow broken beside her. Her eyes were open, searching the darkness, and when they found him, they filled with tears. Told you to run, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We're both terrible at following orders, Jonas replied, gathering her into his arms. Her blood soaked into his shirt, mixing with his own. We need to move, can you? Well, isn't this touching? Kane's voice cut through the darkness, and Jonas looked up to find the man standing over them, pistol aimed directly at Jonas's head. The remaining men, 3 of them Jonas noted with grim satisfaction, formed a semicircle, weapons ready. The hero and his savage dying together in the dirt. Almost poetic. Jonas shifted, putting his body between Kane's gun and Naya. You've already won, Kane. The map, take it. Just let her live. Oh, I'll take the map. Kane crouched down, maintaining his aim. But she dies. She killed my men. Made me look like a fool. That kind of disrespect can't go unpunished. His eyes glinted in the starlight. But I'll tell you what I'm feeling, generous. You tell me where her people are hiding, and I'll make her death quick, painless. That's more mercy than she deserves. Jonas felt Naya's hand grip his arm, felt her trying to speak, probably to tell him not to betray her people. But he already knew he wouldn't, no matter what Kane offered. Some lines couldn't be uncrossed. No deal, Jonas said flatly. Kane's smile was terrible to see. Then she dies slow, and you get to watch. He straightened, nodding to one of his men. Hold him. Make sure he sees every... The shot came from the darkness beyond the canyon mouth, the crack of a rifle, followed immediately by Kane spinning, clutching his arm, his pistol clattering to the ground. More shots followed, precise and deadly, and Kane's remaining men scattered for cover. Mr. Hale! Billy Coltrane's young voice echoed off the canyon walls. Stay down! Jonas couldn't believe it. The kid had come back, had brought help. More rifles opened up from multiple positions around the canyon mouth, at least 5 shooters, maybe more. Billy had rounded up some of the decent men from town, the ones who weren't swayed by Kane's gold. Kane's men returned fire, but they were outgunned and outflanked. One went down immediately. Another tried to run and took a bullet in the back. The third threw down his weapon hands, raised in surrender. Kane himself was stumbling backwards, still clutching his wounded arm, his face twisted with rage and pain. This isn't over, Hale, he snarled. I'll find you again. I'll find her people. Billy's rifle cracked once more and Kane's hat flew off his head. The next shot would have been fatal if Kane hadn't turned and run, disappearing into the darkness of the canyon like the devil he was. Let him go, Billy called to his men. Check on Mr. Hale and the woman. Hands, gentle hands, friendly hands were suddenly helping Jonas, lifting Naya more carefully than he could with his injured shoulder. Billy's young face swam into view, torch-lit and concerned. Jesus, Mr. Hale, you look like hell, Billy said, his attempt at levity falling flat against the worry in his eyes. Feel worse, Jonas managed, then grabbed Billy's arm with his good hand. The woman Naya, she's hurt bad. We brought a wagon, Billy interrupted. Doc Patterson's with us, came soon as I told him what was happening. We'll get you both back to town, get you patched up proper. Well, Jonas wanted to protest, wanted to say that town wasn't safe, that there were more of Kane's men, that they couldn't trust anyone. But darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision, blood loss and exhaustion finally catching up with him. His last clear thought was of Naya unconscious in someone's arms, her hand still clutching that leather pouch around her neck. Then the darkness took him, and Jonas Hale knew nothing more. He woke to sunlight streaming through a window, the smell of antiseptic and clean sheets, and pain radiating from what felt like every part of his body. For a confused moment, he thought he was back in the war, in one of the field hospitals where they'd patched him up between battles. Then memory flooded back Naya Kane, the canyon, Billy's impossible rescue. Easy there, a hand pressed gently on his good shoulder, and Jonas turned his head to find Doc Patterson, the town's physician, standing beside the bed. The old man looked exhausted, but pleased. You've been out for 2 days. Lost a lot of blood. Your shoulder's going to take time to heal, and you've got more stitches in you than a quilting circle project, but you'll live. Naya, Jonas croaked, his throat dry as desert sand. Where is she? Is she alive? Doc Patterson said, quickly understanding the fear in Jonas's voice. Barely, but alive. She's in the next room. Stubborn woman refused to rest properly until I let her see you were breathing. Had to practically tie her down. Relief flooded through Jonas so powerfully that tears pricked his eyes. I need to see her. You need to rest. Both of you do. But Doc Patterson was already helping Jonas sit up, supporting him as the room spun. 10 minutes, Hale. Then back in bed, or I'll have Billy sit on you. The walk to the next room was agony, every step sending fire through Jonas's ribs and shoulder. But he barely noticed because there in a bed identical to his own was Naya. She was pale, her face drawn with pain and exhaustion, bandages visible beneath the hospital gown. But her eyes, those fierce black eyes, were open and tracking his movement. You look terrible, she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. You should see the other guy, sir. Jonas replied, making it to her bedside and collapsing into the chair there. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. I did see him, right before Billy shot his hat off. Her smile widened slightly. I think Kane's ego took more damage than his arm. They sat in silence for a moment, just holding hands, both alive against impossible odds. Then Naya's expression grew serious, her free hand moving to her neck to the leather pouch that was no longer there. The map, she said urgently, trying to sit up. Where is it? Did the key... Right here. Billy's voice came from the doorway, and the young man entered holding the familiar leather pouch. Doc gave it to me for safekeeping. Figured you'd want it first thing when you woke up. Naya took it with trembling hands, checking the contents, releasing a shaky breath when she confirmed the map was still intact. Thank you, she whispered. Billy Coltrane, you saved more than just our lives. You saved my people. Billy's ears turned red and he shuffled his feet. Just did what was right, ma'am. Mr. Hale, he taught me that doing right matters more than doing what's easy or profitable. Jonas looked at the young man with new respect. How did you know to come back, and how did you get the others to help? Billy's expression turned grim. When I got back to town, Kane was throwing gold around, getting men drunk and angry. But there were some of us, me the Hutchins brothers, despite what their pa did old Sam from the livery, a few others who remembered what this territory used to be like before men like Kane showed up. We remembered when your word meant something, when helping your neighbor mattered more than gold. He met Jonas's eyes. We figured if you were willing to die protecting someone, maybe that someone was worth protecting, so we came. You're a good man, Billy Coltrane, Naya said softly. Your father would be proud. Speaking of which, Doc Patterson interjected, there's a matter that needs discussing. Kane escaped, and he's got men still out there. This town can't protect you forever, and I'm leaving. Naya's voice was firm despite her weakness. As soon as I'm strong enough to ride, I'm taking the map home. My people need to know what happened, need to prepare in case Kane finds them despite everything. Jonas felt his heart constrict. He'd known this moment was coming, had known from the beginning that Naya had a duty to her people that superseded everything else. But knowing and accepting were different things. I'm going with you, he said. Jonas, you can barely walk. Your shoulder will heal on the trail just as well as it'll heal here. His grip on her hand tightened. Naya, I'm not letting you ride into Apache territory alone, wounded, with Kane potentially tracking you. Besides, he managed a wry smile. Someone needs to make sure you don't tear those stitches again. It's too dangerous. Your people and mine were still at war. If the army catches us together, if my tribe thinks you're a threat, then we'll deal with it, together. Jonas leaned forward, ignoring the pain it caused. You told me once that the spirits guide us to where we're needed. Maybe I'm needed with you. Maybe this us, everything that's happened, maybe it means something. Naya's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You really are the biggest fool in Arizona territory. Second biggest, Jonas corrected. You're the one who climbed down from that ledge to save me instead of running when you had the chance. Well, Doc Patterson said gruffly, clearing his throat, if you two fools are determined to get yourselves killed together, at least give me a week to get you both stable enough for travel. Can't have you bleeding out on the trail before you make it to this mysterious valley. Billy stepped forward, his young face serious. And I'm coming too, before you argue. He held up a hand. Consider this, you'll need someone who can actually sit a horse without falling off. Someone to hunt, scout, watch your backs. Plus, he grinned, I've always wanted to see Apache country. Heard it's beautiful this time of year. Jonas looked at Naya, saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. Having Billy along increased their chances of survival significantly, but it also meant risking another life, dragging another good person into danger. Billy, my choice, Mr. Hale, Billy said firmly, just like it was your choice to save Miss Naya. Just like it was her choice to come back for you in that canyon. We all get to choose what we stand for. I'm choosing this. Naya squeezed Jonas's hand, and he saw acceptance in her expression. All right, Jonas said, but you follow orders, both of you, he added, looking at Naya. No more heroic sacrifices, no more running into danger alone. We do this smart, careful, and together. Together. Naya echoed, and the word felt like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated when Jonas had found her bleeding in that canyon. The next week passed in a blur of healing and preparation. Doc Patterson worked miracles, his skilled hands and knowledge of both white and native medicine pulling them both back from death's door. The town, once divided over Cain's gold, rallied around them, bringing supplies, sharing information about Cain's movements, even providing horses and provisions for the journey. Jonas learned that Cain had fled south, likely to regroup and plan his next move. But scouts reported his men were scattered, demoralized by their defeat in the canyon. It would take time for him to rebuild his forces, time that Jonas and Naya desperately needed. On the seventh day, Jonas stood in the morning sunlight outside the doctor's office, testing his shoulder's range of motion. It hurt like hell, but it worked. Beside him, Naya was doing the same, her movements still careful, but growing stronger each day. The wound in her side was healing cleanly. Doc Patterson had assured them, though she'd carry the scar forever. "Scars just mean we survived," Naya had said when the doctor told her. "They're proof we're still here, still fighting." Billy approached with 3 horses saddled and ready. "Everything's packed. Food, water, ammunition, medical supplies. Doc says you're both insane, but he also says you're both stubborn enough that insanity might work in your favor." Jonas checked the saddle on his horse, adjusted the stirrups to account for his injured shoulder. "What about you, Billy?" "Any second thoughts?" Last chance to back out. Billy's answer was to swing into his saddle with the ease of youth. "No second thoughts, Mr. Hale. Only forward from here." Naya mounted more carefully, her hand pressed briefly to her side. Jonas moved to help her, but she waved him off. "I can manage. We can't afford weakness where we're going." "It's not weakness to accept help," Jonas said, mounting his own horse with a grunt of pain. "It's wisdom." They rode out of town as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. People came out to watch them go, some with approval, some with confusion, some with fear at the sight of a white rancher and an Apache woman riding together. But Jonas didn't care what they thought. His concern was for the woman riding beside him and the journey ahead. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Jonas knew these lands had crossed them countless times with Margaret, building the ranch, building a life. But now he was riding into territory he'd only heard about in whispered stories and army reports, the heart of Apache country where white men ventured at their peril. "How far?" he asked Naya as they put the town behind them. She considered, her eyes scanning the horizon. 3 days hard riding to the border of my people's territory. Another 2 through the maze canyons if we're not stopped. If we are, she didn't finish, but Jonas understood. If they were stopped by Apache warriors, his presence could mean a swift death for all of them. "We'll make it," Billy said with the confidence of youth. "We've got right on our side. That has to count for something." "Right doesn't stop arrows or bullets," Jonas observed, but he found himself wanting to believe the kid. Wanting to believe that what they'd survived meant something, that the connection between him and Naya was strong enough to bridge the chasm of history and hatred between their peoples. They rode through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and check wounds. Jonas watched Naya, constantly looking for signs of exhaustion or pain, but she sat her horse with the grace of someone born to the saddle. She caught him looking once and smiled, a real smile full of warmth and something that made Jonas's heart stutter in his chest. As evening approached, they made camp in a small canyon that Naya assured them was safe. Billy took first watch while Jonas and Naya sat by the fire, close enough that their shoulders touched, sharing warmth and presence. "Tell me about it," Jonas said quietly. "The place we're going. Your home." Naya stared into the flames, and her voice when she spoke was soft with memory and longing. "It's a valley hidden so deep in the canyons that the sun only reaches the floor at midday. There's a stream, pure cold, fed by underground springs. Trees grow there, cottonwoods and willows, like an oasis in the desert. My people built their homes into the canyon walls using the stone itself for shelter. It's been our sanctuary for 3 generations, the place we retreat to when the world becomes too dangerous." "Sounds beautiful," Jonas said. "It was." Her voice caught. "I haven't been back since my father died. Don't know what I'll find when we arrive. Don't know if Kane's men somehow found it, despite our precautions, if the army discovered it, if my people are even still there. Jonas took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Whatever we find, we face it together. You're not alone in this anymore. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long while, watching the fire burn down to embers, listening to Billy's soft whistling from his watch position. The desert night settled around them, vast and star-filled, and Jonas felt something shift in his chest. Not the sharp pain of grief he'd carried for 3 years, but something warmer, something that felt almost like peace. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words surprising even him. "I know it's fast, know it's probably crazy, but I need you to know. I love you, Naya Rivers. Loved you from the moment you aimed that arrow at my heart in the canyon." Naya lifted her head, her eyes searching his face in the firelight. "Jonas Hale, you are without question the most foolish, stubborn, impossible man I've ever met." She cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle despite the calluses on her palms. "And I love you too. Love you for seeing me as more than just an Apache woman. Love you for fighting for my people like they were your own. Love you for making me believe that maybe despite everything there's still hope in this world." They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And when they finally pulled apart, Jonas saw his future reflected in Naya's eyes. Not the lonely existence he'd been trudging through, but something vibrant and alive, something worth fighting for, worth living for. Tomorrow they would ride deeper into danger. Tomorrow they would face Kane's revenge, Apache warriors' suspicion, and all the complications of two worlds trying to collide without destroying each other. But tonight, under the vast Arizona sky, Jonas Hale held the woman he loved and let himself believe in miracles one more time. The morning of their third day brought them to the edge of Apache territory, marked not by signs or fences, but by a change in the land itself. The rocks grew taller, the canyons deeper, the silence more absolute. Jonas felt it in his bones, the sense of crossing an invisible threshold into a world that didn't welcome men like him. Naya rode ahead now, her posture alert, reading signs in the landscape that Jonas couldn't see. She'd grown stronger over the journey, though he noticed she still favored her wounded side when she thought no one was watching. Billy brought up the rear, his rifle across his saddle, his young eyes scanning the ridges for any sign of movement. "How much farther?" Jonas asked, bringing his horse alongside Naya's. She pointed to a formation of red rocks in the distance, shaped like fingers reaching toward the sky. "Past those spires there's a canyon system that leads to the valley, but Jonas—" She turned to look at him, worry clear in her dark eyes. "From here we're being watched. My people have scouts everywhere in these canyons. They've likely known we were coming since yesterday. Will they let us pass?" "That depends on whether they recognize me before they put arrows in you and Billy." She tried to smile but didn't quite manage it. "Stay close. Don't make any sudden movements, and whatever happens, let me do the talking." They rode on tension, thick as the desert heat. Jonas's hand stayed near his rifle, not touching it, but ready. He trusted Naya, but trust didn't stop arrows, and he could feel unseen eyes tracking their every move. The canyon walls rose around them, creating natural choke points where an ambush would be devastating. It happened faster than Jonas expected. One moment they were riding through an empty canyon, the next they were surrounded. Warriors emerged from the rocks themselves, at least a dozen of them, bows drawn and arrows nocked. They wore traditional dress, their faces painted for war, and their eyes held the hard edge of men who'd seen too much death and were prepared to deal more. Jonas's horse shied, sensing the danger, but he held it steady. Beside him, Billy had gone pale but kept his hands visible and away from his weapon. Smart kid. "Naya." The shout came from one of the warriors, a tall man with a scar running across his chest. His bow lowered slightly, confusion replacing hostility. "Naya Rivers. We thought you were dead." Naya slid from her horse, her movements careful, but her voice strong. "Not dead, Dakota, though Kane tried his best." She stepped forward, and Jonas noticed how the warrior's attention shifted between her and the two white men with her. "I've brought the map home, and I've brought allies." Allies. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Dakota's eyes narrowed as he studied Jonas and Billy, his bow still ready. "White men are not allies. They're enemies, killers, You bring them to our doorstep. I bring men who saved my life, Naya said firmly. Men who fought Cain when they could have let me die. Men who bled defending the map that protects our people. She gestured to Jonas. This is Jonas Hale. He found me dying in a canyon and chose to help me despite knowing it would cost him everything. And this is Billy Coltrane, who rallied men to fight for us when Cain's forces had us surrounded. Jonas dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. I'm not here as an enemy. I'm here because Naya asked me to come. Because your people's survival matters. He met Dakota's gaze steadily. And because I love her. The silence that followed was absolute. Jonas heard Billy's sharp intake of breath, saw the shock ripple through the assembled warriors. He'd just declared his love for an Apache woman in front of her people, crossing a line that most white men wouldn't even acknowledge existed. Dakota's expression was unreadable. You love her. It wasn't a question, but Jonas answered anyway. With everything I am. Another warrior, older, with gray streaking his long hair, stepped forward. His face was weathered by sun and time, but his eyes were sharp as obsidian. I am Kuruk, elder of our council. Naya Rivers is daughter of our late chief keeper of our sacred places. Your claim of love for her is not a small thing, white man. I know that, Jonas replied. I also know I'm not welcome here, that my presence could bring danger to your people. If you want us to leave after Naya's delivered the map safely, we'll go. But I won't leave her to face whatever's coming alone. Naya moved to Jonas's side, her hand finding his. Kuruk, Jonas speaks truth. Cain still hunts for the hidden valley. He's wounded but not defeated. Our people need to prepare for the possibility that he'll find us despite our precautions. Kuruk's gaze shifted to their joined hands and something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but perhaps a weary acceptance of how much the world had changed. Come. The council will decide what to do with you, but know this, Jonas Hale, if you've brought death to our doorstep, love will not save you. They were escorted deeper into the canyon system, the warriors surrounding them, in a formation that was both protection and imprisonment. The path twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow, Jonas had to dismount and lead his horse. Naya had been right. This was a maze that could swallow an army and spit out bones. Finally, they rounded a bend, and Jonas saw it, the hidden valley Naya had described. It took his breath away. The canyon walls opened into a space perhaps a mile across, with sheer cliffs rising on all sides like the walls of a fortress. A stream cut through the center, its water crystal clear, feeding gardens of corn and squash. Cottonwood trees provided shade, their leaves whispering in the breeze. And built into the canyon walls themselves were dwellings, some natural caves enlarged and improved, others constructed from stone and mud. But what struck Jonas most was the people. Children played near the stream, their laughter carrying across the valley. Women worked in the gardens or tended fires. Elders sat in the shade, their hands busy with weaving or tool making. This wasn't just a hiding place, it was a home, a community, a last refuge of a people fighting to survive. It's beautiful, Billy whispered, and Jonas heard the awe in the young man's voice. It's everything, Naya replied softly. It's our past and our future. It's why my father died protecting it, why I would die protecting it. They were led to a large dwelling carved into the cliff face, clearly a place of importance. Inside, 5 elders sat in a semicircle, their faces grave. Kuruk took his place among them, leaving Jonas, Naya, and Billy standing before what was clearly a council of judgment. An elderly woman with silver hair braided with feathers spoke first. Naya, daughter of our fallen chief, we mourned you as dead. Seeing you alive brings joy to our hearts, but you bring white men to our sanctuary. Explain. Naya stepped forward, and Jonas heard the pride in her voice as she addressed the council. I bring more than white men, grandmother. I bring the map safe and whole. She removed the leather pouch from around her neck and held it up. Cain tortured my father for this, hunted me across the desert. But Jonas Hale found me dying and chose to save me. He fought Cain's men, took wounds defending me, risked everything to help me bring this home. She turned to look at Jonas, and the love in her eyes was unmistakable. He is different from the soldiers who hunt us, different from the settlers who steal our land. He sees us as people, not savages. He fights for what's right, not what's easy. Another elder, a man with ritual scars across his face, spoke. Pretty words, Naya. But white men have spoken pretty words before while sharpening their knives for our throats. How do we know this man won't betray us? Won't lead the army here? Because I won't let him, Billy spoke up suddenly, his voice cracking slightly with nerves but growing stronger. I know I'm just a kid and I know I don't have any right to speak here. But Mr. Hale, he's the most honorable man I've ever known. He taught me that doing right matters more than doing what's profitable. If he says he'll protect your people, he'll die trying. Jonas put a hand on Billy's shoulder both to silence him and to show his appreciation. Then he addressed the council directly. I can't prove my intentions with words. I can only prove them with actions. If you'll allow it, I'll help prepare your defenses. Cain will come, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but he'll come. When he does, you'll need every advantage, every warrior, every strategy. I've got military training. I know how white men think, how they fight. Let me help you prepare. The council members exchanged glances, some skeptical, some thoughtful. The silver-haired woman leaned forward. And what do you want in return, Jonas Hale? What price do you ask for this help? Jonas felt Naya's hand slip into his, felt the weight of the moment pressing down. I want Naya to be safe. I want her people to survive. And if... He swallowed hard, then continued. If she'll have me, if you'll allow it. I want to stay with her. Build a life here or wherever she wants to be. I've lost one family already. I'd like the chance to gain another. The silence that followed was profound. Jonas had just asked for something that probably no white man had ever requested: acceptance into an Apache community, the right to love one of their own, to become part of their world, instead of destroying it. Kuruk stood, his weathered face thoughtful. This is unprecedented. We must discuss this among ourselves. You will wait outside while we deliberate. They were escorted from the council chamber, left to stand in the shade of a cottonwood, while the elders debated their fate. Jonas felt the weight of the valley's eyes on them. Curious children, suspicious warriors, women whose faces showed the scars of loss inflicted by men who looked like him. Whatever they decide, Naya said quietly, her hand still in his, know that you've given me something precious. You've given me hope that maybe our peoples don't have to be enemies forever, that maybe love can build bridges over chasms of hatred. Jonas pulled her close, careful of her wound, and pressed his lips to her forehead. I meant what I said in there. I love you and I want to build a life with you. Here, back at the ranch, wherever you want to be, as long as we're together. You'd give up everything? Naya asked, pulling back to look at him. Your ranch, your people, the life you knew. I already lost everything that mattered once. Found it again in a canyon with you bleeding in my arms. Jonas cupped her face gently. You're not asking me to give up anything. You're offering me a chance to gain everything. Billy cleared his throat awkwardly. You two are killing me with all this romantic talk. But for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, Mr. Hale. Both of you are. Before Jonas could respond, Kuruk emerged from the council chamber, his expression unreadable. The council has reached a decision. You may enter. They filed back inside, and Jonas felt his heart pounding against his ribs. This moment would determine everything: whether he could stay with Naya, whether they could help her people, whether love was enough to overcome the weight of history. The silver-haired elder spoke first. Jonas Hale, Billy Coltrane, you have done our daughter a great service. You have returned her and the sacred map safely. For this we are grateful. She paused, her ancient eyes boring into Jonas. But gratitude is not the same as trust. You asked to stay among us to join your life with Naya's. This is a grave request. Jonas's heart sank, but he kept his face neutral, waiting. However, Kuruk continued, we are also practical people. Cain will come, as you said. When he does, we will need every advantage. Your knowledge, your skills, they could mean the difference between survival and destruction. He looked at Naya. And our daughter has chosen you. We see the truth in her eyes and yours. We see love, and love is a rare and precious thing in these dark times. The silver-haired woman stood moving with surprising grace for her age. We will allow you to stay, Jonas Hale. You will help us prepare our defenses. You will share your knowledge of white men's warfare. And if after Cain is defeated or we are destroyed in the attempt you still wish to join your life with Naya's, the council will consider blessing such a union. Jonas felt relief flood through him so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. Thank you. I swear I won't betray your trust. I'll defend this valley and your people with my life. See that you do, another elder said gravely. Because if you prove false, if you bring harm to our people, you will die slowly and painfully. Love will not save you from justice. Understood, Jonas replied, meaning it. He would protect these people not just because he loved Naya, but because it was right. Because they deserved to survive, to thrive, to have a future. The council dismissed them, and they emerged into the afternoon sunlight to find a small crowd had gathered. News traveled fast in a community this size. Faces showed every emotion from curiosity to hostility to cautious hope. A young warrior approached, perhaps Naya's age, his face painted and his bearing proud. I am Ashki. I was friend to your father, Naya. I heard you tell the council that this white man fought Cain. He did? Naya confirmed. Saved my life more than once. Ashki studied Jonas with keen eyes. Then I would learn from him. If he knows how white soldiers fight, we should learn these tactics. Use their own strategies against them. I'll teach anyone who wants to learn, Jonas offered. But I'll also learn from you. Apache warriors are legendary for good reason. We'll combine our knowledge, create something stronger than either alone. Ashki considered this, then nodded slowly. Tomorrow. We begin tomorrow. Tonight you rest. Heal. Tomorrow, we prepare for war. The warrior walked away, but his acceptance seemed to open a door. Other warriors approached, asking questions, sizing Jonas up. Women brought food and water, their manner cautious but not hostile. Children peeked around their mother's skirts, curious about the white man who'd come to their valley. Billy was surrounded by young warriors his own age, and Jonas heard him enthusiastically describing the fight in the canyon, probably embellishing it significantly. The kid was going to fit in just fine. Naya tugged Jonas toward one of the cliff dwellings. Come, I'll show you where we'll stay. It was my father's home. Now? She smiled, and it reached her eyes. Now it's ours. The dwelling was simple but comfortable, carved into the rock with a southern exposure that would capture sunlight. There were sleeping pallets, a fire pit, storage areas for food and supplies. Personal items that had belonged to Naya's father still sat where he'd left them. A pipe. A bow that needed restringing, a blanket woven with intricate patterns. Naya touched these items reverently, and Jonas saw grief flicker across her face. He would have liked you, I think. My father believed in judging men by their actions, not their blood. He would have seen your honor, your courage. Jonas drew her into his arms, holding her while she processed the loss. The homecoming, the weight of everything that had happened. They stood like that for a long time. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, holding tight to the present, because the future was uncertain and the past was full of ghosts. That night, the valley came alive with celebration. Naya's return alive, safe with the sacred map intact, was cause for joy despite the looming threat of Cain. Fires were lit, food was prepared, and drums began to beat a rhythm that seemed to come from the earth itself. Jonas sat with Naya beside one of the larger fires, watching the dancers move in patterns that told stories older than memory. Billy was attempting to learn the steps, his enthusiasm making up for his lack of skill, drawing laughter from the warriors around him. Your people are resilient, Jonas observed, watching children play despite everything they'd endured. We have to be, Naya replied. Resilience is survival. Joy in dark times is rebellion. She leaned against his shoulder. But Jonas, you understand what staying means. The army considers this valley hostile territory. If they find you here, you'll be branded a traitor. You can never go back to the life you had. The life I had was empty, Jonas said simply. Just going through motions, waiting to die. This you, this valley, these people, this is life. Real life. The kind worth living, worth fighting for. Karuk approached, settling beside them with the careful movements of age. Tomorrow, Jonas Hale, you will begin teaching our warriors. But tonight, I would hear your story. All of it. How a white rancher came to love an Apache woman, enough to risk everything. So Jonas told it. He spoke of Margaret's death, of the 3 years of grief and whiskey, of the moment he'd heard Naya's cry echoing through the canyon. He told of finding her with an arrow aimed at his heart, of the choice to save her, of everything that followed. He didn't embellish or minimize, just told the truth of how two broken souls had found healing in each other. When he finished, Kuruk was quiet for a long moment. Then the old man smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. The spirits work in mysterious ways, Jonas Hale. They took your wife to make room in your heart. They wounded our daughter to bring her to your canyon. They brought you both through fire and blood to this moment. He placed a gnarled hand on Jonas's shoulder. I believe you were meant to be here, meant to help us survive what's coming. I hope so, Jonas said. Because Cain won't stop. Even wounded, even scattered, he'll regroup. He'll come for this valley with everything he has. Then we'll be ready, Kuruk said. With your help, with our warriors' courage, with the Spirit's blessing, we'll be ready. The celebration continued late into the night, but Jonas and Naya eventually slipped away to their dwelling. Inside, in the quiet darkness, Naya tended Jonas's wounds with gentle hands, checking the healing, applying new bandages. Your shoulder's improving, she said, running her fingers along the edge of the scar. Doc Patterson did good work. So did you on my heart, Jonas replied, catching her hand and pressing it over his chest. You healed wounds I didn't even know were still bleeding. Naya's eyes glistened in the firelight. We healed each other. You gave me hope when I thought I'd die in that canyon. Gave me a reason to keep fighting when everything seemed lost. They lay together on the sleeping pallet, careful of each other's injuries, their bodies fitting together like pieces of a puzzle finally solved. Outside, the drums had faded to silence, the valley settling into the peaceful breathing of sleep. Tomorrow would bring challenges, preparation for war, the hard work of building trust between enemies. But tonight, there was only this two souls intertwined, two hearts beating in sync, two people who'd found in each other something worth any sacrifice. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Mornings, Jonas worked with the warriors, teaching them tactics for defending the valley against a siege. He showed them how to create choke points, how to use crossfire effectively, how to prepare for an enemy who would use superior numbers and firepower. In turn, they taught him Apache strategies, ambush tactics, using terrain for concealment, reading signs that white soldiers would never notice. Billy threw himself into the work with youthful enthusiasm, quickly earning respect from the young warriors with his shooting skills and willingness to learn. Jonas watched the kid flourish, saw him becoming the man his father would have been proud of. Afternoons, Jonas helped fortify the valley's defenses. They disguised the entrance, better created false trails that would lead attackers into dead ends, prepared positions where even a small force could hold against many. The elders approved each change, adding their own wisdom, creating a defense that blended white military strategy with generations of Apache knowledge. Evenings belonged to Naya. They would walk the valley together, her hand in his, talking about everything and nothing. She taught him words in her language, stories of her people's history, the names of plants and their uses. He shared his own stories of growing up in Missouri, of the war of building the ranch with Margaret. Do you still miss her? Naya asked one evening as they sat beside the stream. Jonas considered the question carefully. I'll always carry her memory. She was my first love, the woman who taught me how to build a life from nothing. But he turned to look at Naya. You're different. With Margaret, it was young love, full of dreams and hope, before the world showed us how hard it could be. With you, it's forged in fire. We've seen the worst the world offers and chosen each other anyway. That's stronger than dreams, that's steel. Naya kissed him, then soft and deep, and Jonas tasted salt tears, though he wasn't sure if they were hers or his. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I love you, Jonas Hale. Love you for seeing me, all of me, and choosing to stay. 3 weeks passed in this manner, and Jonas felt himself changing. The emptiness that had defined him since Margaret's death filled with purpose, with love, with belonging to something larger than himself. The valley's people began to accept him cautiously at first, then with growing warmth. He was still an outsider, still white, in a place where white men were enemies, but he was Naya's chosen, and that counted for something. Billy had become almost more Apache than white, spending his days with the young warriors, learning their ways, with the enthusiasm of youth unburdened by history's weight. Jonas sometimes worried about the kid losing himself, but Billy seemed happier than Jonas had ever seen him. Then, on a morning that started like any other, the warning drums began to beat. Jonas was working with Ashki on defensive positions when the urgent rhythm cut through the air. Every person in the valley froze, then moved with practiced efficiency. Warriors grabbed weapons, women gathered children, elders moved to the council chamber. This wasn't a drill. The pattern of the drums signaled real danger approaching. Cain, Naya said, appearing at Jonas's side, her bow already strung. It has to be. The scouts spotted riders approaching from the south, at least 20 men heavily armed. Jonas's blood ran cold. 20 men. More than Cain had brought to the ranch. He'd regrouped, reinforced, and now he was coming for the final confrontation. How long until they reach the valley entrance? Jonas demanded. Hour, maybe less, Ashki replied, his face grim. They're moving fast, like they know exactly where they're going, which meant Cain had found someone to guide him or had somehow deciphered the map's clues. Either way, the moment Jonas had been dreading had arrived. Kuruk emerged from the council chamber, his voice carrying across the valley. Fighters to your positions, non-combatants to the deep caves. This is what we've prepared for. Trust your training, trust each other, and we will prevail. Jonas grabbed Naya's arm. You should go to the caves with the others. Your wound is healed enough to fight, she interrupted fiercely. This is my home, my people. I'm not hiding while others defend it. He wanted to argue, wanted to lock her away somewhere safe, but he saw the determination in her eyes and knew it would be futile. Then you stay with me. We fight together, watch each other's backs. She nodded, and they moved to their assigned position, a natural ledge overlooking the valley's entrance, perfect for picking off attackers as they entered the narrow passage. Billy joined them, his rifle ready, his young face set with determination. Just like the canyon, Billy said, trying for levity. Except this time we're ready for them. This time we end it, Jonas replied grimly. Cain doesn't walk away from here. The wait was agonizing. Jonas checked and rechecked his weapons, his eyes scanning the approach for any sign of movement. Around the valley, hidden in positions they'd spent weeks preparing, Apache warriors waited with the patience of stones. This was their land, their home, and they would defend it to the last breath. Then Jonas saw them riders appearing at the far end of the approach canyon, moving in tight formation. He counted quickly. 23 men, all armed like they were going to war. And at their head, sitting tall on that midnight black horse, was Silas Cain. Even at a distance, Cain radiated menace. His wounded arm was in a sling, but Jonas knew that wouldn't slow him down much. The man was a survivor, a killer, and he'd come for revenge as much as for gold. Cain raised his hand, and the column stopped just outside effective bow range. Smart. He knew they were being watched, knew this was a trap, but he'd come anyway, which meant he had a plan. Jonas Hale. Cain's voice echoed off the canyon walls, magnified by the acoustics. I know you're in there, you and that Apache bitch. Jonas remained silent, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. I've got a proposition for you, Hale, Cain continued. You send out the woman and the map, and I'll let everyone else live. You've got my word. No massacre, no burning, just the woman and what she stole from me. He's lying, Naya whispered. He'll kill everyone regardless. I know, Jonas replied. He's just trying to divide us, make us doubt each other. Cain waited, and when no response came, his voice hardened. Have it your way? I brought enough men and enough ammunition to dig you all out like rats. You've got 1 minute to reconsider before I give the order to attack. Jonas looked at Naya, saw his own resolve reflected in her eyes. They'd come too far, survived too much to surrender now. He squeezed her hand once, then raised his rifle. Naya, he said quietly, no matter what happens in the next hour, know that loving you was the best thing I ever did. You gave me a reason to live again, a reason to fight. That's a gift I can never repay. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was steady. We'll repay it by surviving, by building the life we talked about, by proving that love is stronger than hatred. Below Cain's minute elapsed. The man smiled. Jonas could see it even at this distance, that cruel twist of lips that promised violence. Cain raised his good arm and brought it down in a sharp motion. Attack! The world exploded into chaos. Cain's men charged forward, firing as they came, and the valley defenders opened up from concealed positions. The narrow approach became a killing ground. Bullets and arrows filling the air, men and horses screaming as the ambush unfolded exactly as Jonas had planned. But Cain's men were professionals, and they didn't break. They pushed forward using their fallen comrades for cover, returning fire with devastating accuracy. Jonas saw warriors fall, saw blood stain the sacred ground, and his heart clenched with rage and grief. He fired methodically, each shot counting each bullet finding its mark. Beside him, Naya's bow sang its deadly song, and Billy's rifle cracked with the precision of youth's sharp eyes. Together they created a crossfire that forced Cain's men to divide their attention to seek cover to slow their advance. "There!" Naya shouted, pointing to a group of men trying to circle around to the left, attempting to flank their position. Jonas swung his rifle and fired, dropping the leader, but more came. Too many. Cain had brought an army, and even with all their preparation, the defenders were outnumbered. Jonas saw Cain himself dismount, moving forward with his men, his pistol in his good hand, death in his eyes. The man was coming for them, coming for Naya, and nothing short of dying would stop him. "Billy," Jonas shouted, "fall back to the secondary position. Go!" The kid hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, but training won out. He scrambled backward, providing covering fire as he retreated. Jonas grabbed Naya's hand. "We need to move. This position's about to be overrun." They ran, keeping low, bullets chipping stone around them. Behind them, Cain's men breached the first defensive line, pouring into the valley. But they were walking into a maze of prepared positions, kill zones, that Jonas and the warriors had created specifically for this moment. The battle devolved into close-quarters combat, the confined space of the valley turning it into a brutal personal fight. Jonas lost track of Naya in the chaos, his world narrowing to survive the next second defeat, the next attacker keep fighting. He saw Ashki take down 3 men with knife and tomahawk before falling to a bullet. Saw Billy, cornered by 2 of Cain's men, fight with a ferocity that would have made his father proud. Saw Kuruk, ancient and wise, standing before the caves where the non-combatants hid, his old rifle, barking defiance at any who approached. Then through the smoke and chaos, Jonas saw Cain. The man was wounded, bleeding from a shoulder wound, but still standing, still fighting. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and Jonas saw recognition. Hatred and a terrible respect in those cold eyes. They moved toward each other as if drawn by invisible strings, combatants parting around them like water around stones. This was always how it was going to end, just the 2 of them, settling accounts written in blood and death. "Hail," Cain said, his voice rough with pain and exertion. "You should have walked away. Should have let the savage die in that canyon." "Biggest mistake I ever made," Jonas replied, raising his rifle. "Was not putting a bullet in you when I had the chance." They fired simultaneously. Jonas felt the impact like a hammer blow to his chest, felt himself falling backward, his vision going dark at the edges. But he also saw Cain stagger, saw blood bloom on the man's shirt, saw him drop to one knee. Jonas hit the ground hard, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He'd been shot in the chest, and he knew with terrible clarity that this was a mortal wound. He'd fought his last fight, taken his last stand. But through the darkness creeping in, he saw Naya appear above him, her face streaked with tears and blood. She was alive. Whatever else happened, she was alive. "Jonas, no, no, please, stay with me." Her hands pressed against his chest, trying to stop the bleeding, but they both knew it was too late. Did we win?" He managed each word, agony. Naya looked around, and Jonas saw through her eyes Cain's men retreating, the few survivors fleeing back down the canyon. The valley defenders, bloodied but unbowed, standing victorious among the bodies of their enemies. And Cain himself, lying still in the dirt, finally stopped. "We won," Naya sobbed. "We won, Jonas. Your plan worked. The valley is safe." Jonas' smile tasted blood. "Good. That's good." His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "Love you, always. Loved you." "Don't you dare," Naya commanded, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare leave me. We were supposed to build a life together, remember? We were supposed to have time." "Had enough, for both lifetimes," Jonas whispered. His vision was fading, darkness closing in like nightfall. But he wasn't afraid. He'd done what he set out to do, saved Naya. Protected her people, found redemption in love and sacrifice. "Tell Billy. Proud of him." Tell your people, honored to fight, beside them. Jonas, please. But he was already gone. His hand going slack in hers, his eyes seeing something beyond the valley, beyond the pain, beyond everything. Jonas Hale died as he'd lived his final weeks fighting for something worth dying for, loving someone worth any sacrifice, proving that even a broken man could be redeemed. Naya held him, her tears falling like rain on his still face, her grief a physical weight that threatened to crush her. Around them, the valley fell silent warriors bowing their heads in respect for the white man who'd become one of their own, who'd given everything to protect people he'd once been taught to hate. Kuruk approached, placed a gentle hand on Naya's shoulder. He died with honor, daughter, died protecting us. That is a good death, a warrior's death. I don't want a warrior's death, Naya sobbed. I want him alive. I want the life we planned. I know, child, I know. They buried Jonas Hale on a ridge overlooking the valley, in a place where the sun touched first each morning and lingered longest each evening. Naya carved his name into a stone marker in both English and Apache, beneath it the words she wished she'd said more often, beloved, hero, home. The weeks that followed were hard. The valley mourned its dead 6 warriors lost, including Ashki, while celebrating their survival. Cain's body they burned without ceremony, scattering the ashes to the wind. His remaining men never returned, and rumors said they'd scattered to the 4 winds, their appetite for Apache gold permanently cured. Billy stayed honoring Jonas's sacrifice by becoming the bridge between worlds that Jonas had started to build. He learned the Apache ways taught what he knew of the white world, and slowly, carefully helped forge connections that might one day lead to peace instead of endless war. Naya healed, though the wound in her heart took longer than the one in her side. She led her people with the wisdom her father had taught her, the courage Jonas had shown her, and the hope that maybe somehow their sacrifice had been worth it. On quiet evenings, she would climb to Jonas's grave and sit watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of copper and crimson. She would tell him about the valley, about Billy's progress, about the life continuing all around them because of his choice to save a wounded woman in a canyon. You were right, she would whisper to the stone. Love was stronger than hatred, strong enough to change everything, strong enough to save us all. And sometimes when the wind blew just right, she swore she could hear his voice carried on the breeze, telling her he loved her, that he'd found her again in whatever lay beyond, that she should live the life they'd been denied love again, if she could, and honor his memory not with grief but with joy. The hidden valley remained hidden, protected now by more than just stone walls and secret paths. It was protected by the memory of a white rancher and an Apache woman who'd proven that love could cross any divide, overcome any obstacle, survive even death itself. And high on that ridge where the sun touched first and lingered longest, Jonas Hale's marker stood as a testament to a simple truth that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in taking a life but in giving your own for something you believe in, for someone you love, for a future worth fighting for even if you'll never see it yourself.